see you post that.
You hear the wife say, oops, that's not good.
Camera's getting me blared. I see how this night is gonna go, Mike. I'm growing my hair out. You would think it would cover it up now, man. Great comment, Clifton. I had hope. All right, I have just shortly after 5:30, this is the City Council study session for the City Council of Holland, Michigan. Thank you everyone for coming tonight. Also appreciate everybody being here wearing masks, doing our best to stay safe and stay healthy, comply with the governor's orders. We're going to be going through the Holland City proposed budget this evening. Very first thing that we need to do is provide for public comment. We have two ways to be able to do public comment at this point. One is through public comment that is submitted through a special website address or special email address that the city has put up, and that is public comment at cityofholland.com. My understanding is we have not received any messages this week for public comment.
We have not.
Oh, we have not. I'm sorry, I didn't have my microphone on. That's my fault. So apologize for that. Didn't have my microphone on initially. I'll quick summarize what I said before for those people at home. City Council study session for the City of Holland. We do this evening, we're going to be going through the proposed city budget. Thank you everyone who's here, all in mass. It's very important, I think, that we're all here in person. As I've said several times before, I've been doing a lot of Zoom meetings, and it's incredibly difficult to be able to communicate with, especially with a larger group. Hard to have everybody on the screen, hard to see everybody's expressions and eyes. I think it's much better for us to be here in person. A little difficult to have the masks on, but we're going to do our best to be able to carry through with this evening. First thing that we would like to do is public comment. We have two ways to be able to do public comment with these meetings these days. First is through an email address that we have set up, publiccomment@cityofholland.com. And as was just stated by the city clerk, we did not receive any emails in regard to public comment this week, so we don't have any there. So I'm going to, for anyone who might be here in person, I'm going to open up the public comment period. Is there anyone here who would like to address council? Seeing none, I will close the public comment period. The next item that we have on the the agenda is the budget review session. Mr. Van Beek.
Thank you, Mayor, and thanks for everyone. Continues to be different, right? And typically, yes, this is a study session, so we would normally be upstairs in the training room, but I think this obviously is the better setup for that. The effort that I'm going to try to do tonight, and that I've asked my staff to do, is find the balance in this meeting between efficiency, because of the situation that we're in, and really not wanting to, we all really like each other, right? But try not to spend more time than needed to go through this information, understanding that you've had now the budgets for, 3 weeks? And there's no shortage of information there. But then, so efficiency, but also providing info. So we're excited about tonight. We're excited about presenting. And again, so I can set the tone of keeping us moving, I'm going to immediately hand it off to Finance Director Tim Vogley, who is going to initiate us with kind of a budgeting 101 and then the COVID impact over everything. Thanks, Tim.
Great.
Thank you for this opportunity to share with you some information about this year's budget. As you know, the majority of this work was done prior to the COVID-19 issue hitting us. But we're going to kind of go through some steps and we'll start there. So first thing, just budgeting 101, and I think not everybody has been part of this before. There's a couple newer members of council, so I'm going to guess that everybody understands this, but the way you prepare a balanced budget is to make sure that the revenues equal the expenditures, right? That's pretty easy math. But this means you got to take a look at both, right? You have to take a look at the money coming in, and you have to look at the money going out. And we try to be careful on both sides of that. We tend to budget conservatively on the revenue side, and we tend to budget conservatively on the expenditure side as well. And hopefully at the end of the year, there's going to be a little bit left over on the expenditure side and a little bit extra money that came in on the revenue side. That being said, we're going to take that then a look first at revenues. If somebody will flip that switch, sure does that slide thing. Perfect. And at this point in time, we're going to kind of talk about the impact of COVID-19 on the revenue assumptions that we made, okay? So I'm going to start with the taxes, and that's where we'll begin this conversation. So that's a big chunk of where the city gets its, at least its general fund operating funds. Other funds also depend on property revenues, or revenues received from property taxes. But taxes are assessed as of December 31st, 2019. And then that number, if you add all the value of the property in Holland, which exceeds $1 billion in taxable value, if you take all that money and you add it up, then you're going to see the dollar number that we multiply times the millage rate. And the millage rate that we're recommending and proposing in this year's budget is found on page 38 in the hard copy. But that amount this year, we are recommending the same millage rate as we have in past years. The past 3 years, I believe, has been the same total number at the bottom. We're recommending we reallocate just a little bit between some of the different areas that receive funds. So the general operating budget monies, we are recommending 8.3 mils, which is a change of 0.1183 mils plus. On the street budgets, or the money that we allocate of the general property levy towards streets and road improvement projects, we're recommending to retain at 1.2 mils. Sidewalks, we're recommending an increase of 0.1 mils so that there be 0.15 mils total there. The capital improvement fund, we're also recommending a small increase of 0.09 mils. The debt service fund, we're recommending a decrease of 0.3 mils. That's because we've received a little bit additional funding in the personal property tax reimbursement, and that means that the dollars that we need to levy to make the debt service payments can be reduced, and that's where the majority of the reductions are coming from. The final part that shows up on the city's millage rate is in the airport fund, which isn't received or retained by the city of Holland. However, it's considered it's received by the City of Holland, not retained by the City of Holland, but it's not considered a separate entity at this point in time for taxing purposes. It actually shows up through the city's taxing jurisdiction. They've actually lost a bit of ability to levy tax due to the Headley rollback, which is a conversation we won't spend much time with tonight. But so the difference there is a small shrinking of what's received and retained by the airport. If you look to the next slide, I want to show that this year the revenues, who does that? Next slide, please. There you go. Thank you. So you'll see here, property tax revenues this year, the assessed value of property taxes, or properties in Holland, increased by 10% over last year, which is a significant number. The taxable value, which is the amount that the city is able to levy taxes against, that's limited by the rate of inflation or 5%, whichever's less, went up 5.8%. Now, it may sound like I just talked about two different kinds of things. The 5% refers to any given property. The overall number can increase past that amount if there are new property, new constructions added to the tax rolls, and that's the case in this scenario. The state increase this past year was 1.9%. That was the inflation rate allowed to apply to the properties, and that means that there was roughly 3% growth in the overall tax base in the taxable values this year. Now, I've sort of rumbled through this, and that just gives you a perspective on the fact that the taxable values of the city of Holland this year, that will not change due to COVID-19. That amount will be collected. And if people are unable to pay their property tax bills this current year, the county will reimburse us for those uncollected taxes, just as has been the case in past years. So property taxes will be received by the city of Holland, and so COVID will not impact that unless council chooses to change the millage rate. If council chooses to change the millage rate, then obviously we would the revenues received would change. So the multiplier, the part of the multiplier that's fixed is the taxable value. If you go back to the next slide, please. So going on then, so we know that COVID will not impact property tax revenues. However, on the revenue sharing piece, that's largely based on sales tax collection within the state. The city receives funds in October, December, February, April, and June for revenue sharing. The numbers through April were right on target. However, they are expected to decrease significantly as sales tax collections are down in these past couple of months. So a key contributor to sales tax revenue is what's purchased at the gasoline pump, and we know that the volume of gallons purchased is much lower, and the price is much lower. So we think that there'll be a number of areas in the economy, not just gasoline sales, but certainly just sales in general of people making purchases. And depending on the economic circumstances, some people are certainly significantly impacted because of loss of income. So I've seen a variety of projections on what the impact will be in revenue sharing. Some people say that they think it could be down 10%. Some people think it could be down 40%. I have no idea. If we were to look at next year's numbers, and it all depends on how fast things come back. But if we were to look at next year's numbers, the city collects roughly $3.4 million in revenue sharing. If that number were to be down by 20% next year, that would be a loss of about $685,000 of revenue. So that's a pretty big number. Again, we have no idea how to project that. The next number I'd take a look at is the BPW transfer. So that is a fairly large part of our budget, and especially on the general fund side. Currently, the transfer in fiscal 21 will be $6,591,621 from the residential sales. Now that math is already figured out, and our budget will be receiving that in this coming year based on prior year sales. So we'll talk a little bit about what impact this may have on the transfer in a couple of slides up the road, but right now that number will stay the same. Certainly, future years, it's gonna have some impact. On the permits and fees, that's a part of our budget, and construction could be impacted in some ways. It's not a major part of our budget, but certainly construction inspections exceed $1 million in the budget. If that is down by 5% or 10% or some number like that, that could impact us as well. And then finally, I'd say that the biggest concern that I would express tonight is in our Act 51 road funding. So Act 51 road funding is basically funds that are collected at the pump when we purchase gasoline. We pay so many cents per gallon that goes into a formula that gets distributed to locals and local streets and major streets. A portion is retained by MDOT, et cetera. We've budgeted on receiving about $5.1 million in this year's budget, and we think that that number could be down. If there were a loss of 10% there, that would mean a loss of about $500,000. So that would be on the revenue side. And the expense side, if somebody flip the slide, please. In terms of emergency spending, we haven't spent a lot of money so far in emergency spending. We've only spent, what we're tracking so far is $11,000, and part of that's reimbursable to us. So we've had to do some overtime for training. We've had some supplies and items purchased, but so far that's not been a big number. There is an impact on payroll. In the short term, our payroll costs are down. There's been some seasonal staffing that has not been filled. There's been reduced schedules. There's been certainly a less amount of budgeted overtime. Some folks are taking no pay as an option. And in some cases where there's no daycare available, there's a 67% impact on budgets. Very, very tricky to project that number, but we think that this potentially could save the city some funds. On the pension side, that's a big number, but for the most part, I don't see much impact on the short-term budget in fiscal '21 especially. There's going to be savings in fuel. The difference between what we paid for gasoline in January versus March was we paid two-thirds less in March than we did in January. So I've never seen anything quite like it. Now and diesel is about down maybe 58% or so. That is an indirect impact on the budget. Those funds are typically collected in the fuel fund, in the vehicle fund, and it could have an indirect impact, but it won't be very immediate, at least in our operating budgets. I'm going to say the next one probably will have a real big impact, and we don't know the math yet, but the Civic Center is a place where we've had to shut down its operations. And so I would think you should plan on seeing a budget amendment come through here in the months ahead as we get closer to the end of the fiscal year. I simply don't know that math at this point in time. And finally, in Windmill Island, last year we exceeded the $1 million mark in ticket revenues for the first time. And $638,000 was deposited in the months of April and May. So 64% of those funds for ticket revenues were received in the tulip time cycle. Obviously, that's going to have a big impact. The city has had to forever, the city subsidized Windmill Island. However, in the last 2-3 years, there's been surpluses generated there, and that'll get dipped in quite significantly. Clearly, staffing will be lower because there's not the island is not open, but this is going to hit us pretty hard. In the next slide, the long-term impact I see is in the pension liabilities. Depending on the economic recovery, I think that this is going to hit us for a number of years in the future, especially if the assets in the portfolio are down. Remarkably, the market is back up right now. I'm still trying to scratch my head, figure that one out. But the market seems to be back for now. But we think there's going to be a long-term economic impact on us. So, and then secondly, the actuarial assumptions, which we were already projecting, have changed, and that will have an impact as well in the long run. Property values, I don't think we're going to see a 10% increase in the property values next year again. Who knows what that looks like? It all depends on the economics. So this will have an impact on us. However, I will say that because there is becoming a larger spread between the taxable value and the assessed value, that typically takes a while for that gap to close. So if inflation persists, and there's certainly some concerns that inflation may be an issue as all the cash has been dumped in the economy the past month or so, inflation could start kicking in, and that could actually drive our revenues, close the gap a little more. We don't know, but certainly property values will be impacted by this, we think, as the economy tends to cool. Revenue sharing here is where we think will have an impact on us. I don't know how to project that, but I think future years, as the state struggles to balance its budget historically, one of the places they like to cut is revenue sharing. And if constitutional revenue sharing, which is that part that comes from the sales tax, is shrunk as well, that could become a significant impact to us. And then the unemployment rate, Holland does not have an income tax. The cities with income taxes are really scrambling right now. But that doesn't have a direct impact on us necessarily, but it certainly is an indirect impact on us as our businesses make investments in spending, and the whole economy is impacted by the employment rate. And then finally, the BPW transfer, in this case, as I said before, there's a 3-year average on the residential sales. We're already projecting that there's going to be some reductions in the rates for electric utility in the future, so we're already anticipating that number is going to shrink somewhat. Who knows whether or not the factories are going to be able to operate at what capacity. Certainly, Dave can speak much more specifically to this issue, but clearly there's been some reduction of consumption there. So that was what I would like to say about our COVID impact on this budget. I will conclude by saying there's many variables, and we just don't know what's going to happen. Let me just further say, I do have one more slide. If someone will flip that switch for us, please. Thank you. The budget as presented will need to be amended. Okay, we know that. We just don't know how. We don't know how to predict it. Some of my counterparts have been trying to figure that out this week and last week, and it's very, very difficult. We simply don't know. So our recommendation will be to approve the budget as presented and amend as needed. And the normal cycle that you would amend the budget, normal council would amend that at mid-year, so typically in January, to give us a sense of how things have looked the first 6 months based on what we projected. Then council amends the budget a second time in May when the budget's approved. And then the third time, typically, council will amend the budget at the last meeting in May. And then periodically, the budget gets amended for unexpected expenditures in the course of the year. So that is how the budget would get amended, and that's what I would think makes sense to us at this point in time. Thank you.
Thank you, Tim.
So thank you, Tim. I think Tim did a great job, and we took a little bit more time probably than what you're going to find as we go through the other budgets, because I think the impact of COVID right now, it just begs a lot of questions, right? And I think what Tim outlined, if I would highlight things, it's uncertainty. It's really lack of any ability to predict what's coming as it impacts both our revenues but our expenditures. I think it's an emphasis that while we do have short-term impacts, the way that the structure of funding for local government works is that this is going to be more of a thing where it has a long-term impact on us for multiple years, and it's not going to hit us in the same way that it hits most everybody else, businesses, individuals. It just impacts us differently. This is where the work that you all have done in the past years, and maybe especially in the last 2 years or last year, of really taking a look at a long-term focus, is going to provide great benefit to the city. Because there were a multitude of things that we kind of shored up, shall I say, making investments again in our road network and not really being, as far behind as we were, and getting caught up and maybe even getting ahead and getting those budgets in good shape. Windmill Island Garden is a fantastic example of just incredible staff and community work to get that in a positive place. We were really excited, we're still really excited, but we were presenting a budget that had year-end from FY20 really nice contributions to continue to tackle our pension liability issues, and had a nice chunk of money that we were going to be able to make, that down payment there. Really nice contributions to our municipal capital improvement fund to do the investments that we wanted to do in the amenities for the community. Well, those are going to take hits right now, not only in closing out FY20, but we also had kind of starting points where we made contributions to those in 21, and those would probably be some of the first places that we would unfortunately have to look, right? But we have some of that capacity. But I strongly agree with Tim that our recommendation is that we present the budget, you would consider and adopt the budget, and then we're gonna have to, but ultimately you guys amend the budget. We don't amend the budget. We go through a process, we make recommendations, we're gonna have conversations with you. I cannot envision a scenario where we're gonna wait till January of next year and make the first amendment to the FY21 budget. So I would expect that there will be way more communications with you as we get more information and stick with kind of what we've adopted from day one of the pandemic happening, of making good, solid decisions when we have good information. So expect that would be our expectation, our recommendation as it relates to the budget.
Can I ask a question? Is that
Sure,
appropriate? Do we get-
absolutely.
Okay, first, Tim, thanks for the presentation. It was very concise and explained a number of things that had come to my mind. You did a good job of being, presenting it for a dummy like me, so thanks for doing that. Acknowledging that there's a lot that we don't anticipate and can't anticipate about where the fund balances are going to be. Either Tim or Keith, maybe you can refresh our memories. Typically, we have the budget stabilization fund year-end balance that are often used for that sort of thing and designed for that. But if we run into a situation where those amendments are gonna have to be larger than normal, I mean, I know a portion of the BPW contribution goes to Municipal Capital Improvement Fund. Also, I think it's 40% that goes to other initiatives. So just remind us, is there other flexibility in the budget? So if we have to, we don't want to deplete necessarily the budget stabilization fund, but do we have the fluidity within the budget to move some funds around? I know there's some restriction, but can you help us understand that?
Yes, I will start off and then Tim can fill in detail. Yes, and that's absolutely where we would make initial recommendations when we get that we have flexibility. So our long-term focus has paid off. We have some of that flexibility. We have money in some of those spots. If this isn't the definition of the use of a rainy day fund, I don't know what is. So we feel that, at least for the foreseeable future, underscoring that there's a lot of uncertainty there and nobody can really know, right? We feel that we have some options available to us before we would get into, for those of you that have been here for a long time, where before we have to cut into cutting existing services or those types of things. Because quite frankly, we're still 30% lower than in staffing levels and corresponding service levels to where we were prior Great Recession. Now, I think we've right-sized in that, and I think we're able to provide great services to the community. But yes, Dave, I think that we have some capacity in some of those areas where those would be the discussions that we'd want to have with you and present to you some recommendations to kind of ride out these uncertain times. But again, I expect this isn't gonna be just like an impact on FY '21. Especially, I'm most worried about the pension liabilities and the revenue sharing. And those are big dollar amounts. You know, revenue sharing is what, between 13% of our revenues, something like that. And I think that's gonna be a significant hit, and it's not just a one-year hit, I'm afraid. Tim, what did I miss?
No, I would exactly concur with that. I'm not nearly as concerned for fiscal '21 as in the next guy who sits in this chair. Next person who sits in this chair has to figure out 22 and 23.
Sucks to be them.
Timing is everything.
No, I think, Dave, 21, I think, I can't imagine a scenario where the city would be in significant financial difficulty in '21. I think that the situation is in the future years. And I've identified the two possible places it could hit us in '21. And there's about $1 million in the budget stabilization fund and another $3.8 million in the general fund balance. So there's certainly plenty of place there to draw from if needed. But I don't see that as being that big of a challenge in '21. Again, '22 and '23, depending on the pension impact, is where that really takes into our operating budget.
Okay, thank you for that.
So it's really hard to move on from that, right? Because it kind of overlays everything. But we're going to, and I'm also going to kind of take on the tone of what I and staff were really excited to do, which is present a budget that we're excited about. We think it's a responsive budget to the needs of the community, definitely, but also we think it's really responsive to the advance and the goals, not only in just this most recent year of council, but also for multiple years. So what you see in the slide in front of you, and again, I'm gonna try to, we're gonna go quickly, right? We're gonna try to do that efficiency thing. But please don't have that stifle, information or questions. Long-term focus, these were things for multiple years and then tweaked a little bit, right? We think this budget delivers on continuing to grow the tax base with a special attention to the monumental and the great work that we did in this last year with Waterfront Holland and the opportunity that presents, and taking advantage of those opportunities. We believe this budget provides for our infrastructure through the continued funding of the Municipal Capital Improvement Fund. And I talked about that, where we were in an extended period of time in the city where you just were not able to fund that capital improvement fund. And if you did, you only did it at the end of a budget cycle. And Matt in particular has taken the lead on this and built that 50-year approach. And this budget really builds upon continuing that very important trend. Continue to monitor, so it talks about pension and other post-employment benefits. We're really excited that we were getting ahead of that and that we were seeing kind of the light of the end of the tunnel where, and you see the drop in the shift from, for example, the debt obligation to other sources in the budget so we could fund things and fund growth. Really excited about that continued delivery in this budget for that long-term goal. Continuing to build relationships and partnerships with other governments. A lot of work in that you're gonna see, I think, in department reports, but that continues to be an opportunity long-term. And then strategically, that funding with the Holland Board of Public Works. Dave, you referenced that 40% as being really kind of that carrot, that seed capital to push some of those partnerships forward. So we continue to be really excited about the opportunities that exist there. Then, as far as strategic investments, we're also really excited that we think this budget has new strategic investments. And I'm gonna highlight 4 areas. Housing policy, and in particular, affordable housing under the 80% area median income in conjunction with Waterfront Holland. We're excited about talking to you and pointing out some of those areas tonight. The community energy plan, not only to evaluate and have targeted money to fund how we go about evaluating possible next steps and updating the community energy plan in the way that we have in the past, but also to increased current investment in sustainability, both on the city side and the BPW side. Continued, I think we've seen progress in this past year, and we look to continue that progress in this coming year of continuing to strengthen efforts in diversity, equity, and inclusion. And then we're also excited to talk to you about and present some opportunities for council to continue to engage with residents. So we're excited about the budget that we're going to present tonight. So how are we going to review the budget? Now we're going to step back into COVID world a little bit because it's different, right? So we've tried to consolidate. You've got a huge amount of information here. First, we're going to do budget highlights. Staff is going to come in, make a presentation from the podium. For the most part, every one of them, they've got one slide with bulleted highlights that they're just going to talk about that they think is really important from their perspective. You'll see that a lot of those highlights, right, they're about the service that they provide to their community. So most of it is going to be about kind of what they do, right? But you're also going to see where they're going to highlight things that I think speak to council and community goals. And then if there were any that relate to them, we've directly taken questions that were submitted by council, and we have them up on the screen, and then that way just everyone knows what was asked and the answer that we provide. Thanks to Lynn and Nikki for submitting those questions, so you'll see those as we go throughout the night.
People.
And I just want to say, kind of as we transition, I have the next slide too, but I could not be more proud of the team that I get to work with. Not only in just normal times, if I was just doing the normal budget presentation, but in particular with the challenges that they've all faced over the last 7 weeks, the amount of time, the ton of work in presenting this budget book, but then, you know, altering it to make this presentation to you tonight is second to none. I wouldn't trade one of them for anyone else. And again, not only am I, but we're really excited to develop this budget, and we think it delivers. All right, so one thing, just two things that I want to highlight just kind of for context. One, as you go through the budget books, kind of with each different description or group summary, you will see, and you see here that we continue to move towards, we're trying to connect the goals, the what of council, where you have goals and objectives. And what you'll see is those are in just plain writing in the descriptions. So we didn't change those, right? Those are the goals and objectives that you adopt. And I get that I present them to you in a strategic plan, right? But they're draft and then you adopt them. Really what I'd encourage you to look at is all of the writing in italics as we go through the different budgets, because that's the department how. That's the department strategy, tactic, deliverable, that they're delivering on the services that they provide. And in many times, and we'll highlight those, repeating back to you, if you would, that during the advance and the goals that you set, that we're hearing you and we're delivering back on those. So I just wanted to point that out where there's a lot of writing on some of those slides. This is still a work in progress, quite frankly. We're excited about the direction that we're moving. But highlight on the italicized, because that's the budget's, that's the department's communication to you of what they're working on, what their work plan is for the next year. Next, what you'll see is still to come. And yes, you would otherwise have this in a non-COVID world. But no, I haven't had time to give you your April update on the FY20 strategic plan and business plan. You will get that Normally, you would have gotten one in April. And again, this is the first time through. We've never had this before. And then I would also give you a year-end one. So I don't know if I'll give both of them or if I'll just give one year-end one when we get through the entire year. But that's still to come, and I think that's a really important component. And then the next slides also talks about, will be familiar to you because this is the outcome of your work at the advance with your rankings for the strategic and business plan. And yes, normally you would have had a draft strategic business plan at this point also. You would have had it, if not at the same time, maybe even earlier than you would have gotten the draft budget 3 weeks ago. Again, my apology. There's been other things happening, so haven't been able to deliver on that for you. Really, a key component of all of that is I think the strategic business plan, this new thing that we're adopting, it really delivers on a key component of the governance and the relationship between you as council and me as your employee, but by extension, I represent all of the staff that do work on your behalf and of the city. But also, I think that's kind of a still to come, and it's a missing component, because quite frankly, every organization, there's a lot of goals that organizations set that aren't necessarily dollar related. So there's going to be things that aren't in the budget, but it doesn't mean that it's not a goal or not something that we're working on. It's just the budget doesn't necessarily capture that. So still to come, you will get that strategic and business plan that will talk to those things. So with that, we are going to start this process, right? So staff is going to come through. We'll probably speed it up a little bit. Tim and I are maybe a little more long-winded than the rest of them. We'll see. We'll wait till Coster gets up here. Yes, I'm poking fun of him. And we're just going to march through the budget highlights, and then if there were any questions. So Tim, again to you and your fantastic staff, quite frankly, particularly Michelle Price, you can begin your last budget presentation ever, and we're going to miss you. Take it away. General fund operating. And we kind of talked about this. I expect that this might go quick.
Okay. All right, if you'll advance the slide. This first slide talks about where the money comes from in the general fund. And let me get to that page. And that this chart is in your budget document, I believe, on page 77 on the hard copy, page 80 in the electronic. And it tells us that there's $25.443 million coming into the general fund, and about 40% of that, or 41% of that, comes from property taxes. In addition to that, interest and license and permits and charges and that sort of thing. And certainly a large amount comes in from the operating transfer in from the BPW. But that's where the money comes from with the general fund. And then the next slide tells us about how that money gets expended. And first of all, this one is by classification. The classification means about 67% of these general fund dollars are spent on people. And there are a variety of other categories of expenditures, but for the most part, most of our money in the general fund is spent on people. And finally, the third slide shows us where the money is spent, what we say by function. And by function, that means public safety of this budget is 45.8%. Fiscal services is 9%. Management and admin is 12%. And then transportation of this budget is not a large amount. Most of transportation funds are spent in the major and local street funds as well as in the capital funds. And then finally, community neighborhood services is at about 8%. So that's sort of the big chunk of how the budget is put together. And on the general fund side, if you will advance the question up the next. All right, I'm done.
All right. Sorry, I was just riding herd on our wonderful staff out there. So you answered both of these questions?
Not yet, that's what I'll go there.
All right.
So there's a city manager recommended column in the budget, and how do we read that column in terms of budget approval? There's an amount, when we go through the budgeting process, there's what the staff asks for, and then finance sort of takes a look at that, and then we plug in a number. And it's just kind of, our software is set up for us to be able to accommodate that. So we get the requests in from staff first, and then we say, oh geez, that doesn't, there's a mistake there, we saw something that doesn't look quite right, so then we sort of extend that into the finance number. Eventually, then the manager recommended number is where we end up with where we should go. In some cases, somebody may have missed something. In some cases, there could be a reclassification of that expenditure. In some cases, we add funds to that. So that's, the manager recommended number is sort of what we end up with. Does that answer the question, or do you want more?
And I think there may have been one or two, and there's one or two where like for whatever reason, the manager recommended column like didn't populate. So we'll clear all that up. Like that was just, and it's probably, there's no major change from the department proposed.
Okay, and with respect to the millage calculation process, it's a question I'm not exactly sure what you're asking, so I will just say a couple things to start with. When the voters first authorized the council to operate in this committee, they identify an amount that could be levied. We can levy up to, I think it's 18 mills or something like that number. And that number then is a multiplied against the taxable value to determine how much could be raised. The city has not levied that full amount, and I was looking through my notebook, I failed to write it down, but the city has the ability to levy at least a couple more mills than we are levying currently.
Several more.
So we have the ability to levy more. We've chosen to stick at this number we've been at for quite a number of years. And so that's the multiplier that we use. We take that number by the millage rate, understanding we have the ability to expand that if we need to. However, the city is, in its responsible ways, chosen not to levy the full amount. There's very, very few cities in Michigan that have room to levy additional taxes over what they currently are. Almost
Very
all
few.
cities are in the situation where they levy as much as they can. Now, there's some other factors that limit our ability, and there's something called the Headley rollback, which reduces that amount, and I don't want to bore you with all that. Does that answer the question you have? Very good, thank you.
All right, and with that, at the request of the mayor, and I think it's a great request, we're gonna jump into management administrative services, which is just kind of a global area where there's a lot of different budgets or funds underneath that. And the mayor has asked, and I certainly support this, that he's actually gonna present your budget. So, Mayor, take it away.
Thank you. This is my first time with this, so asking for grace on this as well, because not only is it the first time I'm presenting on this, first time dealing with this. Most of what we do as council has to do with the what of what it is that we want to have happen in the community. We set policy, and then we ask staff to implement that in a variety of how ways. This is really, in my mind, one of the areas of the budget, maybe the only area of the budget, that we have the direct control and responsibility of the how piece of this. We have, and it's one thing I didn't think about much before I became the mayor, there's a budget for council. There's a budget for not only our salaries, but also for events that we go out to, for the training that was done, for things like the governance training that was done by council last year, all comes from a particular budget within the city, and that is our city council budget. And it's our responsibility and our obligation to spend those dollars wisely. And there are a few things, if we, go to the next one. We are continuing that governance process. That's part of that civil discourse piece that was brought up as a priority by the council in the January meeting. So we're going to continue working on that. And again, that is something that I want to make sure everyone is very clear on, is our responsibility as council. This is not necessarily something that we can say to staff, hey staff, will you make sure that we engage in civil discourse? and we do what it is that we need to do. We need to be the ones that are taking the lead on the items that are within the budget. Citizen survey is another one. There's a $20,000 number there. That helps us with that community engagement piece, with that idea of being able to have an idea of what it is that our stakeholders in the community feel is important, so we're able to get that community input back in. There are more dollars in the budget this year for training and events, and that's gonna tie right into one of the questions that we're gonna have moving forward. And I see that as covering not only that community engagement piece, but also that civil discourse piece as well, and our governance piece as well. The more training that we can get, the more that we can get out into the community, and there are dollars that are associated sometimes with getting out into the community. We need to be able to do that. Also, the proposal is also that we are, as a city and as a council, are gonna be doing community promotions and supporting community events in terms of things like paying for the cost of a full table, not only for council, but also for staff members at things like the Lakeshore Ethnic Diversity Alliance, at LOOP, at the Diversity Forum. We want to make sure that we have the opportunity, and staff has the opportunity, but in my mind, doubly important that we are there, that we're out there in the community, not only to talk to the constituents in the community, but also to be visible and give them the opportunity to speak with us as well. One of the most valuable things that I've found in the short period of time that I've been here is, if I'm at those events, that's the time when people feel comfortable coming up and having those conversations, that they may not come to a public comment period, but if you're sitting next to them at a table at a luncheon, they're gonna talk your ear off. And we wanna make sure that council's got the opportunity to be able to do those kinds of things. We also have allocated $5,000 for the Citizen Leadership Academy. This is not just for other citizens, this is for our participation as well. If council's not interested in being active participants in something like this, my belief is that we shouldn't be looking at doing it. This is, again, our responsibility, our obligation to make sure that we are using those funds within our budget to fulfill our own priorities within the budget as well. And then also $20,000 for citizen engagement software. And this is one of those things where I went, what in the world is citizen engagement software? And I had a great explanation from the city manager on it, and I had a great example yesterday of when citizen engagement software would have been incredibly helpful. We have been putting out 2 videos a week during the COVID-19 crisis. We put out one yesterday, and the stats as of this morning were about 33,000 views, 500 shares on the city's page, hundreds of comments, additional comments on other people's shares, and trying to track what all of those comments were and those different places where the engagement were is a nightmare if you're just trying to scroll through and figure out what's going on. And it's not only, and those are just Facebook numbers. There are Instagram numbers, there are Twitter numbers, there are the numbers that are coming from, say, the Holland Sentinel or Wood TV8. Software like this has the ability to be able to pull that information together and to be able to give us reports and responses so that we can actually see how the community is responding to what it is that we're doing. And so we're looking at a software package that's gonna help us be able to do that. We got a great report from Marianne Manderfield in the middle of the afternoon yesterday to kind of give us an overview on it. But those numbers and those things were changing so quickly, it was really hard to keep track of. And that's what we're looking at in regard to what the city council's budget portion of this is. Could you go to the next slide for questions? A question from Nikki. The West Michigan Chamber sessions, I think you're talking about like the breakfasts and those things. Is this a big cost to the city? Should someone attend and report? Should everyone attend? Should we coordinate? They seem to be quite frequent. My opinion on this, and other council members can my opinion is the more of us that go, the better off we're going to be. There's not a huge expense for each one of those. I believe it's in the neighborhood of $25 to $30.
Typically, yes.
Typically to go to one of those. And while we could probably put together some kind of complicated system and schedule of when people show up, I don't think there's ever likely to be a situation where all 9 of us are showing up at the same meeting. And the more of us that can rotate in and out of that, I don't think that at this point there's a necessity for a schedule for that kind of thing, but just an encouragement of the dollars are there. for us to be able to do that, that is a very valuable thing for us to do, to be out in the community. And I want to encourage people to do that as much as possible. I know that we all have different schedules and different abilities to do those kinds of things, but the more of those kinds of things we do, the better off we're going to be with the citizen engagement piece of this. Next question is actually a similar question, but with a bigger dollar amount that goes along with it. The MML Mackinac Conference or other big conferences and seminars. And this is one where I've had discussions, because again, being new on this, I said, hey, what are the rules in regard to this? What are the policies? And Keith and staff went back and said, we're not the ones that make those decisions. You as council are the ones that make those decisions. And so one of the things that I have been considering putting together, but wanting input, and again, this COVID-19 thing has kind of thrown a wrench in a lot of the things that I planned of working, and I'll sit down with some council members who've been around longer than I have to develop what I'd like to do is see a threshold for, hey, if it's under X dollar amount, no need to get approval from council to do this. You know, if you're looking at going to a $100 conference, doesn't need to go in front of council. But if you're looking at flying to California and spend 5 days at a conference, maybe that's something that the other members of council ought to have a voice in before that decision is made. And so looking at finding a way to be able to help make those decisions for people, because again, my feeling is if the dollars are there, we ought to be using them to the best of our ability to be able to get the training we need and get out into the community, but there needs to be some guardrails there as well. That's all I have.
Thank you, Mayor, and I definitely echo that with those questions, Nikki. As your manager, I think there is great value, and I love to see council members attend community events, because I think that really delivers in one sense of connecting to community and engaging with citizens. But I also love to see you go to the MMLs and those things of the world, because then you're connecting with people from other communities and learning, increasing your knowledge for because it's the job that you do. So I'm a strong supporter of that, so really encourage that. I think it's great.
So a question regarding policy, because you're talking about policy for training and conferences and why we would attend and what the intention behind it is. And I think it's fine. It's wonderful. I think it's needed. But when we start talking about determining community events, how are we as a board determining what event we're sponsoring or what event we're attending? And how does that portray a sponsorship or an endorsement of this board? It's one thing to engage, participate, and listen. It's another to endorse or to support an event or an activity. What is the policy of this board, and should that not be the same thing as when we're creating a training policy, is do a likewise, have a group of us meet and determine a policy for which of these type of events we're going to spend our dollars on going forward?
I think you're exactly right with that, and the few that were mentioned there, just as an example, are ones that I believe fit exactly in with what council's priorities were for this year when we talk about our top priorities being, one of our top priorities being diversity, equity, and inclusion. If you look at the three that are mentioned, are all community organizations that are dealing exactly with those kinds of things. So if we are looking at something like that, my feeling would be that whatever it is we're doing should be following whatever those policies are that the council has expressed are our most important priorities.
Right, so like the Disability Network, it's another one, right? They have a number of things. And I think we need to look a little bit broader than just saying these two particular events.
Yep.
What more is going on throughout our community and maybe outside our community? I know our focus is on our community, but things that would impact our community later. So I just think we need to have a bigger discussion about that rather than just, you know, a few
And one
places.
of the things that we may want to look at, because there's a little bit of a system that's in place now where staff has giving us a heads up on the bottom of our Friday communications in terms of, hey, here are some items that are coming up on the agenda or on the calendar that you may want to participate in. We can, as council members, communicate to Cinca and say, Cinca, here's an event that I'm aware of that I think that it would be nice if council would be able to attend. And the other is, if there's something that a council member says, hey, I think not only should we have this be an item that's open for attendance, let's make the suggestion to council that maybe we look at using our dollars to be able to support this individual organization because it fits in with our policies. So again, we're not pushing that off completely onto staff, but we're taking the responsibility for that and saying, you know, we all have those areas that we know very well, that we think are very important areas and that we're the most engaged in. We should be the ones that are providing that information to staff so that it can filter back to council. And right now, I think maybe the best way to do that is to use that system that we've got in place. Or are you looking at saying, hey, let's form a committee to discuss this
It
and
could be
create a
one and the
policy?
same committee for the training and conferences. I don't mind that either. I mean, I just think it needs to be addressed through committee of our peers here, decide how that's going to work. And that's between all of us, and then we bring that forward to the city manager, say, you know, budget likewise.
Like,
One thing you want to remember too is that a lot of these are brought to us by some of our boards and commissions. Three of them that were mentioned would be through the Human Resource or the Human Relations Commission and things like that. So a lot of times we will get recommendations from those committees or commissions and saying, okay, and I mean, the greatest thing here is I can't think of the name of it now.
Diversity Forum this past year?
Not the diversity, the celebration that we had that,
International, yeah.
celebration, there we go. The International Festival. That was a prime example of coming from the International Relations Commission, the Human Relations Commission, coming to us and saying, we would like to do something like this. What do you think, and can we sanction it as a city? So there's a couple of different ways that we can look at that. What you're suggesting is great, but let's remember our commissions and boards also that are part of us as a recommendation, saying, yeah, we really would like to do something like this. They can give us the facts, and then we can make that policy decision from that point.
Right, and I think we have to really also consider, we are members of the Chamber of Commerce, right? And we are members of Lakeshore Advantage. We, like the Airport Authority, which we serve, there's likewise opportunities for us to attend on other kind of funding, right, that they have, or because we're membership. So I think we need to really kind of have that committee look at those things. I think there's plenty of that to look at. We can also, you know, solicit or provide our comments or ideas for different groups, organizations we work with, and then have that committee kind of break it down and say, okay, there's funding in this area for that, through a different channel, so we don't have to spend time and effort looking at how we're going to budget for that. But we certainly could look at these other areas and say which one. And then I really think part of it is this, you know, endorsement. You know, not all of us are going to agree on certain subject matters out there. And so, you know, as we're taking this on, we have to be careful that we're not positioning ourselves as a council to represent all of us if we agree or disagree on certain issues. And I think we should have that debate or discussion amongst ourselves.
sounds good. I will get that group together so we can start those conversations. Other comments or questions? All right, let's move forward, Mr. Van Beek.
All right, believe it or not, there actually is a city manager budget, so I'm gonna present that. Click through there, Matt, thank you. Really, no budget changes. Really, it's a status quo budget on just a few things that I just wanna quickly highlight. There is funding. You guys created a new public art advisory committee, which is doing some really fun, exciting work. And one of the things particularly in there is that there's a $4,000 line item so that we can, what we'd like to do is partner with the Holland Area Arts Council to take a look at all the art that we have really owned by the public, if you would, in this building and others, so that we can make sure that we're curating it correctly and that we have someone else making decisions about what and where and all of those types of things. So that's something that I hope to have wrapped up. For those of you that have been in my office recently, it's one of those 75 folders that's on the back of my desk, so we'll get there. Regional partnerships is definitely something that I personally continue to spend a lot of time on. And West Michigan Express is one of those specific ones that we're really excited about. Man, it's really a bummer right now because that was just at the point of really of really going, and I think that was just gonna be a foundational change for the region, but also specifically as it just integrated so wonderfully right into our city. So we are not giving up on that, but obviously that's a pretty major COVID impact right now. And then I also directly serve a work group of some of you right now. We know that there's significant board, commission, and committee work that I'm excited about as we move forward. And that is the city manager budget.
Well done setting an example.
All right.
Yeah.
So Kathy Grimm.
Okay, our budget is focusing on Proposal 3, the impact on election budget, staffing, printing, and postage. As of today, we don't know what elections are going to look like for the rest of this year or into the future.
Really?
There is a possibility that the state will require all voting to be done by mail, and this was not planned in the preparation of the budget. This would impact our budgets for office staffing and election day staffing, printing, and postage. The city currently has 25,790 registered voters. Our system is set up well, but the tenfold increase of potential vote by mail residents will require an increase in resources prior to Election Day. Continued passport acceptance agency. We were on track to meet or go over our expected revenue for passports, but as everyone is experiencing, our passport services have been closed as of the stay-at-home order. And then iCompass cross-training, user support, preparation, and follow-up. We need to get more staff trained on that.
And then there was one question here for you, Kathy.
Oh, great.
And I think this was the staffing. It's really, Kathy's just done a great job of juggling some of her responsibilities, but that are in her office.
A lot of this is based on the election and how we see the elections going forward. Our staff can handle our permanent absentee list the way it is now. If all elections become a voter mail-in, we will definitely need to start looking at.
Yep. So thank you, Kathy. And that brings us to the first of our podium presentations. And I cleaned it before, but just, I got a lot of comments, and they were all supportive, of course, about me doing this in between each time last time. So we'll do this again, and excited to welcome Jennifer Orm.
Good evening. Okay, well,
We're just
Crickets.
hypoxic here.
this is odd to talk through a mask like this. Hopefully a first and a last. So I just really want to highlight 4 key points in my budget. And the first one is our workers' compensation. We have seen some really good results with decreasing our amount of claims costs, and lost days. And a lot of that credit goes to the employee safety program. We've formed a central safety team made up of employees from all across the organization, and we've done some education efforts, newsletters, some audits, some ergo assessments, and we've really seen some good results from that. So there's no budget impact, but wanted to just talk about continuing moving that in the right direction and seeing our employees working safely and not having those large claims. Next is to implement the wage and classification study recommendations. So hopefully very soon we'll be presenting that to you. The executive summary and the report and the recommendations from that outside firm, HR Collaborative. We did budget $60,000 for those recommendations, and that number was, loosely based on what we had heard from them kind of initially, what some of the recommendations would be, but that could be less, we're hoping. Next would be to enhance the training and professional development program, the framework. That would be to address succession planning, building our bench strength, making sure that we have those critical positions ready to be filled with internal talent. So we're looking at, enhancing that with some additional training programs. We've already had some great success with our customer service training, our emotional intelligence training, and some leadership training, but we'd like to make that a little more robust, especially in that leadership area. And then also just to encourage employee engagement. It's great to get our people together so that they can continue learning, developing, and building relationships and bridges across the organization. And then lastly is training and hiring efforts to reduce bias in the hiring process and to promote diversity, equity, and inclusion throughout our organization. So we are increasing our training budget slightly so that we can start working with some regional partners. I've talked to LEDA, we've got those conversations started. Also working with Robin up at the Ottawa County Diversity, Inclusion, and Equity Department. So working with those regional partners and then looking at ways that we can start evaluating our processes and figuring out where that bias exists and how we can get rid of it. So slight adjustment to the budget there.
And Jen also talked about you are attending a particular class yourself too.
Yes, so I actually already attended that class, and so I am certified through Michigan State University, and that's the, actually I have it here, it was the Certificate in Organizational Inclusion and Diversity. And it was a great program. It was a full day in Lansing. There was a test at the end, so I did get my certificate, did pass that test, but learned a ton of great information that I can bring that value back to the organization. So we're trying to employ what I brought back from that program and then also what partnerships we've formed within the region.
And then there was one question for you that doesn't really sound like a question, but it's out there. So go ahead and read that for yourself and out loud.
Okay, great. So impressive decrease of days lost over the past 2 years. So this is in regards to the workers' compensation. Really speaks to a strong human resources department. And again, I'd like to take credit for that decrease. I think we had, 44 less days of people being off work after an injury. So that's a huge deal. And real quick, I do want to just give a shout out to that central safety team and those employees that have worked together as a team to reduce those claims. And then also, we had received an email from Accident Fund, that's our workers' compensation carrier, and I want to quote her, she said, "The City of Holland continues to knock it out of the park with decreasing claim severity. 2019 shows a 40% decrease of claim dollars from 2018 and a 44% decrease from 2017. So those are huge, huge numbers, and we should all be really proud of that. So I appreciate you pointing that out, Lynn. All right, any other questions?
I do have one.
Sure.
Could you, I'm getting, in regards to the implementing the wage and classification study, could you talk about what you would spend that $60,000 on? What does that entail?
Sure, so that would be taking their recommendations and figuring out a way to evaluate all of the recommendations and pinpoint which ones we'd like to take on. And so that would increase the salaries of some of our individuals, also the hourly wages of some, change the classifications. So, there would be an ongoing cost to some of those changes. We definitely would want to take a phased approach, I would imagine. It's not something we would just say, okay, July 1, we're going to accept all 48 recommendations. But we would evaluate those and discuss those with you as a group and make sure that everybody was on board and kind of, like we did with the Moses study, kind of take it piece by piece and implement some of those recommendations, if not all. Yeah.
And this is a newer practice, a new practice. I think it's a best management practice where instead of kind of every budget, maybe a department saying, hey, I think this position is underpaid and you really need to, and do it on a piecemeal basis. This takes an approach where maybe every 4, 5, 6 years, we would go through such a study and take a look at all of our non-union positions and make sure that we're meeting market and internal comparables and all those types of things, and then make those adjustments there. So this is the first time, but we think this is a best management practice.
Yeah, it's definitely good to do it every couple to few years, and it does create a fair and competitive, you know, compensation program for our organization and against, you know, other organizations in the area, but it is just for non-union employees, and it's a healthy exercise to do. Yep,
Oh, and Mike, you've got a question?
Yes. Jen,
yes.
I know and Keith had mentioned it earlier, we're 30% down from what we were prior to 2008 yet. I don't know how to exactly put this, but I want to make sure that we don't go down that path again. Going through the Moses study, knowing what you've done to this point and what staff has done to this point, I'm hoping we're being more proactive so that we don't have to get to that point. It's obviously going to be a paradigm shift. Your thinking is going to have to be just about 180 degrees from what it is or what it has been, potentially, especially with Tim's great news about the future, which is no surprise at all. So I'm going to be a little bit cautious here. And we've talked about succession plans. Maybe we ought to potentially look at stepping that up just a little bit. More cross-training potentially, things along that line.
Yeah.
Those are the things that I see going along with the staffing. We've got a fantastic group.
Oh,
We've
yeah.
got a fantastic employees, both the BPW and the city. I wouldn't trade them for anything. I want to make sure we hold on to them. I want to make sure we're treating them right, paying them the right wages, having them come to work happy,
Right.
going home happy and safe. It sounds like I'm putting it all in your shoulders. I'm not. This is something as I read through this that was popping into my head of what we just went through 10 years ago. I don't want deja vu. You
Right.
definitely don't want deja vu. So, just a couple of comments and
Sure. Yeah, I
take 'em
appreciate
for what
that.
they're worth.
And it does speak to all of my goals. You know, employee engagement, that's huge. We have candidates ask about, what's your training program look like when they're in the interview? So having a robust training program and having a safe work environment through what we've done with our workers' comp program. You know, we don't have a high turnover rate. We haven't for a long, long time, and I think that speaks to our culture. It's a positive place to work. People are paid fairly. We have excellent benefits, good development program in place, so I think we're on the right track.
Thank you, Tim.
You bet.
Thank you. Any other questions?
Thank you.
Thanks. Have a good
Thanks.
night.
All right, I promise you'll stop hearing from me shortly, but here's in particular very much, I hope, what you recognize. You can see it in the budget book in the increase in funding, one that we're really excited about, and it's a combined economic development and sustainability office. So let me walk through this and highlight some things that maybe don't otherwise jump off at the page. First, this would convert an assistant to the city manager position that's been in the budget but hasn't been filled. So it's not a completely brand-new line item for this, but it does adjust it, convert it to an assistant city manager position. So that would mean basically we get two Matts. So it wouldn't be Matt reports to, or this person reports to Matt. It's really two really high-level, high-functioning, and because of that, you know, well-paid, but positions that really speak to the commitment of the community, speak to the commitment of council in two very important areas. I think it talks about, and it speaks to the time that, quite frankly, I don't have the time to do all the other things that we need to do and then focus in these two important areas to give it the, you know, really the credence that it deserves. The horsepower and the ability of the person that we would look to hire, and high-level attention to the issues. I've certainly heard in talking to people, you've heard the same things, that we need to demonstrate a commitment in these two areas, and I think that this recommendation does that. Let's talk first about economic development. It's half of the position would be focused roughly, towards economic development. One, for those of you that have been around, this would bring back a portion of a position that historically the city always had, most recently held in the person of Greg Robinson, who did that economic development function, who cultivated those relationships, not only with the business community, but with lots of other organizations that were taking a look at putting development into the city. Additionally, because we are losing Tim Vogley, Tim really has been the one that's held this work together since Greg left. Tim is a finance director that can do all those things in the finance field, but we really had I guess the saying now is we had a unicorn in someone that also knew and was able to function in these areas and understood complex things, and they're not as simple as they appear sometimes when we present them to you, like tax abatements, like Renaissance zones, like, all of the different wonderful programs that we have to negotiate and understand that if you don't have those in place, then some of those developments don't happen. So in losing Tim, we're also losing some of that bench ability that would only make the work then more difficult. Because when we hire a new finance director, I think they're going to have their hands full just with the finances. Then this important work needs to go somewhere. We'd continue our partnership with Lakeshore Advantage. I'm certainly not saying that this takes away from the important work that they do, but now we have a point person that is really going to, every week, be dealing with Lakeshore Advantage and support each other. I talked about the complicated abatements for development and tax base, and I want to make clear that this is absolutely, it might sound like, because economic development sounds very business, right? So the waterfront Holland process that we went through and the excitement of growing our tax base and what downtown can look like absolutely fits in this area. But it also absolutely fits in the area of affordable housing, because I think as we've had lots of discussions, the affordable housing, they come to you and there's things that are involved there where we have to talk about abatements and pilots and all of those types of things. And Tim is the one that really has been the front line on that. But I think if we're going to accomplish the goals that you've set, we need to have more horsepower in this position that's working this every week. Some would say, and this will kind of segue here, economic development and sustainability, like those seem like potentially two different things. I couldn't more wholeheartedly disagree. I think they make a ton of sense to go together. I think there's sometimes some tension in those areas, but they integrate so well. So we think it's really wise and really economical in its own way to have the same person work on both of these topics, because so many of the issues are interrelated. Housing, density, transportation, sustainability discussions about triple bottom line. So that's why you see this recommendation where it's one role that really is split then between two things that I think go hand in hand in so many ways. And then if we shift to the sustainability part, just a couple things. One, I think, again, this clearly communicates and increases the city commitment to sustainability and all things related to sustainability, which I think responds to the goal that you've set. But I also want to specifically highlight some of the line items that otherwise might not jump off the page at you. What we're trying to do is we're trying to capture not only historic investments that we've made in sustainability in one place, so they're not dispersed everywhere, so we can capture them in one place. And I think we'll continue to do this in coming years. But you're also going to see that we have stepped up our investment in some areas. And the highlights that I just want to put out to you here are hybrid vehicles. There's several purchases of hybrid vehicles that you're going to see in different departments. Specifically, what we've put in here is we've put the differential, we've budgeted for the differential, if you would, of buying maybe more, I don't know what the right word is, a standard vehicle or what we've maybe historically purchased. And if there's a differential cost to buy a hybrid or an electric car, we would capture that differential cost here, because I think it's a good way to track the investment that we're making. The next thing you'll see is, oh, and I have the old notes here. Dave, help me out again. Not the green energy, but the renewable energy premium. Thanks, Dave. So there is a program that's always happened with in the BPW. Quite frankly, it's probably not taken as well advantage by enough people. But here what the city is saying is we are paying this renewable energy premium for all of our utilities. That's projected to be $31,600. Now, the base utilities are all spread out throughout the budget, just like we've always done. But what we want to do is we want to capture this number and reflect it here, that this is a statement of our commitment to doing this renewable energy premium. And you can ask Dave later about this, but this would be then money that's captured and then is put directly towards changing the portfolio in our community energy and renewables. Project Clarity is a number that we've continued. Last year, this was a number that we bumped back to previous amounts, and we just think it makes sense for that to be recognized in this department. Trees, this is another thing where obviously this is, it's about recreation and about making the city beautiful, but it has a sustainable element. So we've captured that in this budget. Community education. So historically, we've had, I think the line item is $16,000 that we've been contributing. And really that's for a portion of, if you know her, Michelle Gibbs' time. Because there's been a lot of turnover and kind of a stalling in some of those things, Michelle, for the last, I don't know, at least a year, maybe more than that, has temporarily been doing this work under the umbrella of the city. She's up on 3rd floor, and she does community education work. What we're recommending here is that we up that amount to a total of $50,000. Now, the community education work is about sustainability, and what we believe, and we're strongly recommending, is that, quite frankly, in this space, the city is not the best educator on some of these things. Believe it or not, folks, sometimes when the city says something, they don't always like to hear it from us. Shocking, because we're all such great people, right? Additionally, what we're definitely trying to do here is that sustainability isn't restricted to the boundaries of the city. So what we're looking to do is up our investment, and that, quite frankly, the first step would be that you would support this increased investment. But what we're looking to do is we're looking to have a partner that we think really would do this better than we do. And we think that the Outdoor Discovery Center is the place that we would recommend moving it to. They already have a larger footprint. We already have an example of a great partnership that we've successfully done with them in the DeGraff Nature Center. And quite frankly, this is what they do. I mean, it's a cornerstone of what they do. Community education about nature and, by extension, about sustainability. Now, I want to make clear, first step in that is just that we have a budget for it. But I am just letting you know, my recommendation would then be to follow that up and have that communication. I've already talked a little bit with the Outdoor Discovery Center, but then we'd follow up with that. And then the final thing is, like I said, I think there's maybe a few other more minor items I didn't want to highlight too much, But what we'd want to do is in coming years, we'd continue to capture those things where the city is making investments in the area of sustainability, that we'd capture it in this department. And I think that's it.
I don't know if you wanted to mention that premium represents going to 100% renewable. I don't know if you mentioned the percentage it would represent for the city's consumption of electric.
Yeah, so there's options that you can do as far as how much you do, and this would be the full option. So we would basically convert to 100% renewable. And I think, Dave, BPW has or is doing the same thing on your side.
Right, we're looking at that for our facilities, not, that are in the city of Holland, as part of our system.
Right. Thanks, Dave. So with that, I think there were some questions. Nikki asked, is there any chance that this new position will be funded or not, even when collapsing 2 other positions? And we're not really collapsing other positions. It's a position that we had that wasn't filled. I will tell you, even with the COVID, negative news that we had to deliver to you tonight, I would today tell you I would recommend proceed with funding this position, because I think it's critical moving forward. I think it's a gap that we have grown to have, partly because of the loss of the Greg Robinson position prior, partly because I know the impact of losing Tim will have on us. But I think it speaks to your goals also. So I would still continue to recommend moving forward. Now, that being said, like a lot of things in our budget this year, how we do it, when we do it. And I have some ideas of how maybe we can accomplish these things and maybe not do it in a full launch either. So, but step 1 is I'm making a budget recommendation, and then you guys get to vote on that budget recommendation. So that's where I stand today. What is your sense this year with all the potential reduced funding and positions? I think we've answered most of those, Nikki, at this point, but I'm happy to, if I miss something, I can clarify anything there.
Thank you.
So thank you. Then we're going to move to Esther. Oh, hi, Quincy.
Sorry, Quince.
So on the, can you go back a slide, please? One more, I'm sorry. So on the community education piece, we talked about recycling a couple weeks ago and rolling out a new platform for that as well. So I guess one of my questions is, will there be an education piece to be presented as well in that community education?
Yeah, and in fact, that's great. So there's going to be a specific education piece for our recycling program that we have grant dollars for. And I want to make clear too, this community education, don't think, oh, this is that's all the community education we do. This is a very targeted community education just on that sustainability piece. Think of like the living sustainably along the lake shore and all of those things that Michelle has done a really great job of not only representing the city, but other organizations. So yes, Quincy, the recycling would be taken care of separately when we get that grant, which we fully expect to get. That would not be tied with this, but let's say it's a year and a half from now, or so from now. What I foresee is if you approve and we move in this direction, the ODC is doing this, well, then we can feed information to the ODC and they can promote something that we're doing. And it's just one more avenue, it's one more hit, and it falls within really raising the understanding, the education of sustainability. And what's cool about that is it's someone else saying it.
Yes.
And so it's not that we're not saying it, we're saying it, but someone else is saying it. And now it's an audience that's larger than just the city boundaries. And we
Great.
think those are 2 really important things.
Me too, thanks.
I have a question too, Keith.
Yeah.
So I just want to make sure I understand the deliverables and the sustainability portion of that. And I wonder if you're imagining that whoever this person turns out to be would have some leeway in creating the position in a way that would, like, it doesn't sound particularly defined to me, and are you imagining that the new person would then have an opportunity to define that and get some input, not only from us, but from the community as well?
Yes, and obviously there's some overlap here, like with community energy plan type things, but it's not just that, it's other things. So, you know, I think there's some discussions that we would have with council. I'm not assuming anything here, right? Because it's not an approved budget yet. But yes, I think it's something that we'd grow into. It's not gonna be perfect day one. So I intend to hire a high-level person in both of these areas, and I think we can find that person. And then absolutely, you hire good people, you give them leeway. They need to be that connection into the community. And I think we're gonna see payback in this area. Thank you.
Anyone else?
All right. Esther. Hi, Esther. So thanks. Matt just cleaned the podium. And one thing that I'm not going to do very often, but so for Esther, one thing that I'm going to point out, we talked about the wage and classification study. I was going to make Esther talk about this, and this is probably taking her a little bit by surprise, but she is one of those roles, and it's a role. When you do a wage and classification study, you look at roles, you don't look at people. But Esther is that person in this role, and she does a fantastic job. She's demonstrated it in the time that she's been here. So that wage and classification study, I'm gonna tell you, increases the pay for that role, but it also changed the title, so it would not be a coordinator position, it would be a director position. And again, I think that speaks to the commitment that the city's made, the role that it plays in the community, but I'm also gonna say it's not why we did it because of Esther, because again, you do these things based upon roles. But come on, Esther does fantastic work. And I think she's just fantastic at creating those partnerships that Jennifer talked about, that I'm talking about, that I think is just cornerstone and delivers on where we want to go. So, sorry, Esther, you had to get that lead in.
Thank you, Keith. Good evening. My key areas that I want to work on this year and that fall within the pillars of the business plan that we have for our city.
Can you lean in just a little bit? You're going to have to be bold, Esther.
Can you hear me?
Yes, there you go.
Good evening. So I'm going to talk tonight about some of the initiatives that I am going to be working on this year, and I'm really excited about. The first thing will be to develop and formalize an equity toolkit to enhance diversity, equity, and inclusion in the work that we do throughout the city organization, and also looking at our council and our commissions and how they will look at the projects before them to ensure that we're applying a toolkit and measuring the outcomes. We're going to do this with the support of a relationship that we are going to cultivate and work with our Ottawa County Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Office. We think that support, again, it's not just the city saying we have to do things. We have a partner that we're working with in collaboration. This will be a regional approach. So we want to support them in the work that they do, and reciprocally, they're going to support us in the work that we're doing. We want to formalize our board and commission training, and again, we recognize that it's really important to have diverse members of our community on boards and commissions, and we think that this training will begin, we believe that the training will begin to prepare individuals within the community to serve. We want to continue to collaborate and coordinate with cultural organizations and our nonprofit partners. This is a very important part of the role that I have, but also what we're able to do in our community and serve all the residents who live within our community. It's important to continue with our tenant landlord forums, and we hope that we'll add more rigor to that as we go forward, and again, through partnerships with organizations in the community that are doing different types of work in that same arena and bringing all that knowledge together for our tenants and our landlords. We are going to continue to work on the International Festival. Our board met last night, and we are thinking of creative ways to get through the COVID-19 and continue our new tradition. And we, as always, want to continue to support youth leadership development. We think that's really important, and our Holland Youth Advisory Council and Youth on Boards, we're teaching them, basically we're role models for how they can serve in their communities after they become adults. So all of these goals fall under the pillars of providing quality service to our community stakeholders, working collaboratively with a lot of our nonprofits and other government organizations, enhancing our customer service internally and externally, and finally, maintaining and helping improve our financial position. I said that just for Tim Bogley. All right, so are there any questions that I can answer for you?
Yeah, Jay?
Hi, Esther.
Hi, Jay.
You know that diversity, equity, inclusion is probably the highest priority we had this year.
Mhm.
So I'm sensing that you're taking that on, and that's going to be found pretty much right here. That's how your department's going to be addressing that with the toolkit and those kinds of things.
Yes, but it's important to remember that diversity, equity, and inclusion is not just one person. It's everyone working together and developing a platform, a toolkit that's going to work, and where we can have specific goals and we can measure the outcomes. So it's a big, big project.
I'm just looking at the budget here under Human Relations Commission. What was proposed, 132, a manager's recommending 123, so your budget's actually down a little bit this year. Is there any other resource, money for that, or is that your budget to attract our number one priority of how we want to address diversity, equity, and inclusion going forward?
That's a very good question. We are able, the work that we're able to do shouldn't cost money. It's more, we're gonna have to invest money in it, but it's process. It's working with departments and looking at our processes and procedures to help develop what we're trying to achieve with diversity, equity, and inclusion, and that's important to remember. Also, just so you know, and you know this because Jennifer was here earlier, we are going to be very aggressive in the training platform for diversity, equity, and inclusion within our city government. And I will take that platform and work with it outside in the community as well.
I'd like to address that too, just because really what happened there is if you take a look at the budget and you flip the page to the International Relations Commission, basically you put the two together and it's significantly more. So there was just some adjustments that we made as far as the allocation of staffing. And I think there was something that actually fell in one department that we moved to the other department. So,
You know, Esther, I don't think anybody squeezes more effort out of the budget than what you've had to work with as long as you've been with the city. I think you do a phenomenal job. And I do like the International Relations Commission. I see that budget is a lot bigger. I assume a big part of that is let's do this international celebration bigger and better.
Yes.
But that's different than my mind of diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Well,
It's trying to get some effort, some horsepower, some direction, maybe professional direction, to help us understand that we've been talking about this for a long, long time. And I've been sitting here a long time.
I know.
And I was hoping that somehow, with a priority as high as it is, that there may be an opportunity to budget some dollars to do this in a much bigger way than I think you can do with the budget you have. I mean, you have nothing to do with that. But, you know, the Downtown Development Authority really has taken on a lot of this because they realize they've got a world-class downtown that has some serious issues. A third of our population is not white, and that's the fastest growing population we have. In 10 years, the dynamics are gonna be much greater. And I just don't, I think the challenges, I think our diversity has come upon us quicker than we have reacted to date. So I'm hoping my colleagues are listening to me as well too when we talk about the budget and before we pass it. This is not what I had in mind when 9 of us voted for diversity, equity, and inclusion for the city of Holland to take a good, hard look at ourselves and prepare ourselves for the next 10 years. We've never had the discussion, so I don't know what anybody else at this table is thinking. But I, for one, I really hope my colleagues are listening here. I think that was a priority for a reason. Try to remember the last time 9 people voted for a priority like that. It's unprecedented, as long as I've been sitting here. So I just encourage us to think bigger for you, because I do think you do a phenomenal job. And I think you've been under-resourced for a long, long time. Thank you.
Who else? Yes, Scott.
When we talk DEI, do we include people with disabilities as well? I mean, I don't see anywhere in here when I do a control search of any word talking about disabilities. Does this include any of that
It does.
dynamic?
When we talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion, we're talking about underrepresented communities, those communities that may not have the same accessibility that others do. And our persons with abilities fall into that category.
I appreciate that. I noticed the book club, I believe, is what was listed. I know there's a lot of books out there that talks about how kids interact with people with disabilities, and I think that's really important for this community to embrace that as well. Thank you.
Yes.
Any other questions? Yes, Quincy.
I have a couple of questions, but first, I want to congratulate you on becoming the director. I think it's very well handed out. I've known you for a long time, being on HRC with you, so congratulations.
Thank you, Quincy.
2 questions, and they're kind of in the same vein. Is there a plan to reach diverse groups? Do we have something now, or is that something that's going to be worked on in collaboration with Ottawa County?
We do not have something on paper, but I'm always trying to reach out to other groups. And I believe that through the Racial Equity Toolkit, we'll begin to have something on paper that says this is what we do. There's things that I just automatically do when
Yep.
we're working on something, but, yeah.
Okay, go ahead.
So I'd
Go ahead.
just add, because I think there's been certain things in the budget presentation that already speak to this. But, so for example, your citizen survey. Remember, one part of that is we definitely want to reach people, and the methodology that's used there is make sure that we get a representative sample. Jen talked about a lot of things of reaching out. And then I think, quite frankly, your attendance and our consideration of support of our community partners, LIDA, LAUP, out on the Lake Shore, Disability Network, and with the county, I think that speaks to Quincy. What Esther does really well is integrating with those community partnerships to do the work, and do that through partnership.
Great,
The partnerships are crucial to the work that I do.
absolutely, relationships. Then, high school engagement or student engagement, one of the things that I see, and I'm not at fault pointing fingers or anything like that, but we see, it seems like the same kids come in each time that they come in. And when they present the awards as well, it seems like it's the same kids I keep seeing. How do we reach out to all kids at the schools?
Well, In the past, we relied on recommendations from our school counselors, recognizing very early on that that was limiting participation. We continue to ask for recommendations, but we actually put it out to all students, not specific students that fit certain criteria. So we're trying, we're doing our best, but you have to remember that that also is an internal thing. We have to remember that kids have to want to participate. And we do reach out to LAUP, to several partners in the community to say, hey, we're doing this. Do you have any students that you think would be great, that would enjoy this opportunity? Not everyone wants to be in government. I know we hate to say that, but it's true. Not everyone wants to participate in Holland Youth Advisory Council. It's a great group of kids. I've seen, you will see kids over and over again because we have kids that start out as freshmen and they continue on through until they graduate. It's a wonderful experience for their, for jobs and for their college applications. So it has changed, and I want you to know that that particular group is very diverse. It's the most diverse. If we called them a board or a commission, it would be the most diverse board and commission that we have today. But a lot of that is your voices speaking into the lives of young people in your neighborhoods. You know, we want you to do that. We want you to encourage kids to participate in government. I love it when kids participate in city government.
Nikki?
Yes, so we have a certain budget here, and recognizing that your work is in many different areas, in the international relations and human resources, everything. And let's say we pass this, then you and your colleagues have, in your discussions, come up with a nice, an idea that might involve $50,000. Would this be one of those items we can go back and amend as we do with other items, if we wanted to allow that kind of money to be available to this commission, this department?
So if there was a very large project that I was interested in working on, I would work out the numbers. My process would be to go to my city manager and say, hey, I would like to do this. Can I bring it before council? Because this cost would be out of our budget cycle. So that's how we would handle that. When I put the budget together, I look at all of the activities that I would like to see happen in the following. It's kind of a vision, right? So you're assigning numbers to that. But if there were something would come up, I would go right to my city manager with a plan, with a budget, with some outcomes, and then ask for permission to present to our city council. And I know that you would be generous. I think there was a question from Lynn.
I'm trying to see if that covers most of the questions, maybe, Lynn. Maybe you
Yeah,
can take a look at yours.
Yep, I think so. I do have an additional question, Esther, but I didn't know about the, whether or not the Community Network for Education or the Let's Listen collaboration were new. Are those new initiatives for you, or?
The Community Network for Education was called something else a long time ago. It was started by Al Serrano when he was here. And what it is, it's a consortium of nonprofit organizations that are kind of focused on education or providing types of services to schools that are extra, like arts and all that good stuff. What we do is we come together. About 2 years ago, we had a very heated discussion at our strategic planning because we felt like we need to do more, we need to be more integrated. So last year, our focus was Jefferson Schools. We started that process and have now created a subcommittee that's working just with that school, and we're starting to model this process that we've started with Holland Middle School, and we'll be starting to meet with their educators to do a needs analysis. It's a very small group, but a very devoted group, and the goal is to address not just student need, but wrap around as a community through our faith leaders and our business partners. So,
Great. Any other, is that?
I
is that-
just had
Oh, yeah,
it
go
isn't so
ahead.
much a question as a comment, and maybe a little bit in response to Jay's concern about what the expectation was, and I guess I'm not exactly certain what my expectation was when we chose this as a priority. But I guess if I'm looking at commitments based on process and program, where a process like creating a racial equity toolkit as compared to a program like the International Festival, it seems like there's a good variety over your portfolio and the rest of the staff that we're doing both of those things, where I think they're both really important. I think we often lean towards program, but it seems like you and the rest of the staff have really identified some processes that would help to increase diversity, equity, and inclusion. So I'm glad to see that, and I appreciate your commitment to that. I think also, I always think about the ways that I can be a part of that too, and it isn't just about the city staff making that happen, but how do we contribute as members of the community to that process as well? So it helps me think about what I need to change also and what I can do.
That's a very good observation. As we begin to work on the equity toolkit, you will begin to have opportunities to participate in different ways. And our boards and commissions, we wouldn't be able to do what I do in my role without the boards and commissions that come around me. So if we can just kind of do the same with other boards and commissions.
Thank you, Esther.
You're welcome.
Thank
Thank
you.
you very much.
Tim, it's your chance again, man.
Thank you. So, our role tonight is not to talk about what we do all the time, but what we do a little bit different. And so this year, it's going to be much different. For our office, we're going to go through the transition of finding new people to work, or a new person to work, and go through that education and transference, hopefully, of some of the things that I've learned since being here. And currently, I've announced my retirement, and I'm planning to work through the end of this calendar year. I believe the city has begun looking for my replacement. I've gotten some emails to that effect anyway. And that cycle, there'll be a time where we both work together, and then my plan is to be gone by the end of December. And in part, we'd planned for this some time back, and I delayed the retirement a little bit in some of this transition cycle. But there will be some funding coming from the Budget Stabilization Fund that was put there a couple years back to be able to address this issue. So that's part of what will happen. And then secondly, another thing we're in the middle of working on, and we are very optimistic that this can be put in place actually before the beginning of the fiscal year, is to working with other area governing bodies to create a pooled insurance program. This is a pretty exciting opportunity for us, and we see some potential and actually fairly significant savings in the cost for our insurance program. And so that, I hope, will be in front of council before too long, and ideally in place prior to the July 1 insurance year. So that involves a board, it involves creation of a separate entity, it involves participation with other governing bodies and representatives from those bodies. But when these resources are pooled, there can be significant savings for the community and for each participating community. So that's the other major piece that we're going to be working on in the days ahead. That's it. Oh, continue on. Holland Energy Fund. All right. So, in addition to, let me start over. The Holland Energy Fund, as most of you know, is a separate 501c3 nonprofit corporation owned by the City of Holland. And its board consists of 2 representatives from the Board of Public Works Board and 3 representatives from the City of Holland council members. I function as the president of that organization, and because it's a separate entity, we have set a separate public hearing process for that board, in part to ensure that it properly gets addressed and discussed. So the board approved the budget for Holland Energy Fund, the recommended budget for council, at the last meeting in March. And that budget includes sources of, I've got my budget turned around here, sources of $427,000. A large chunk of that comes from a transfer. And there's some interest earnings as well. That's basically interest earned on loans that are outstanding to the fund. Obviously, that's not really income because we're paying for the use of that money as well. So it has to show as income to the from an accounting perspective. On the use side, we're going to continue the home energy retrofit program. Our goals are to see another 100 homes done, and that project has slowed down just a little bit. The program has slowed down just a little bit, and so we've been thinking of new ways to motivate participation. And one of the ideas that the board has approved is the initiation of a program called the SEAL Team that'll go in and do some more effective or more energy efficient means that are less costly for homes, and to provide incentives to encourage that. And so Holland Energy Fund has allocated $50,000 in this budget to get that started. Again, the goal would be certain sealing of the property and attic insulation, but not go beyond that in terms of these are the most efficient measures that can be done, and not go through the more extensive full deep home energy retrofits that we'd hoped we could continue with, and we do hope will continue, but we just wanted to see a bigger impact, and we felt like this might be a way to get some momentum rekindled and restarted. So the budget includes $50,000 for that. It also includes continuation of our on-bill loan program, which is $68,900. That involves borrowing funds from the BPW that's provided capital for us, and then reimbursing them for those funds with interest. We contract out the origination of these loans. Origination means the application and applying for those loans. And we also have been contracting out the servicing of those loans, determining what the interests and the costs are, and after we make a payment, how does that apply, and how much do I have left, what's the balance, and making sure all those things flow together with the BPW billing system. We're looking at the possibility of bringing that in-house. In fact, I have a meeting tomorrow with the BPW software provider in hopes that we can possibly bring that in-house. So our hope is that that'll happen this year. The community energy plan, we've got $160,700 allocated to that. That includes $100,000 for consultant support for the strategic development team to work on updating the 5-year strategies. It's been not quite 5 years since the last strategies were developed. So we are hoping that a similar process is developed in the past to ensure there's community participation and really see the significant expansion of what we can accomplish there and achieve in the next 5 years. It includes $48,000 for support for other fund development itself. We're trying to figure out other ways to bring a new spark, a new energy, and potential fundraising options as well. But we feel like we need some consultant support for that as well. There's funds for marketing. The Sustainability Institute, there's funds there to help us continue on with the carbon footprint calculated, doing some energy education, and also work on the dashboard. So the total budget cost there is $540,300. Obviously, if we don't get that all expended in 1 year, it carries over. You'll notice that last year we did have a carryover. We were unable to expend all the funds there. So we've continued to invest in that and hope that we can continue to move forward. So that'll be a separate public hearing next week, or excuse me, on the 13th. And that'll be done independently. It is included in the city's budget, however, as a budget document as well. So have I answered the questions? How's you want to know what's staffing?
Well, yes, I think you have answered, but so you're the staff person assigned to the Holland Energy Fund?
Yeah, so when Holland Energy Fund was created, our goals were not to pay for staff to keep it going. So my time is spent on Holland Energy Fund. In addition to that, one of my staff, Sarah Kuiper, does a fair amount of work on the admin side of that. And the BPW has a significant investment of time as well. I would say the hours that the BPW staff spends on this is certainly larger than what the city staff is spending on it. And that's, Dave can speak specifically to that question, but that is something that they also participate in.
So, I'm glad to hear you say that it needs increased energy, and so I'm glad to see some of the increases for funding. Would the question that that new person we are perhaps funding with the second assistant city manager, would that person be involved in some of this? Because I do think some of it's the marketing, and I see the marketing's up in some areas and down in some areas. It's a great program, but you want to get it. It seems to have a lull, as someone said. So would that person be involved in this too?
Yeah, but I would want to make clear that that they would be involved in it, but we have parts and pieces across this entire organization. It's kind of like DEI, it's like sustainability, where we have lots of people that are working on this. The new position would really be the leader of, the coordinator of, and making sure like we're driving forward. So that's one way that I would answer that, Nikki. But also there isn't a staff that's assigned or paid out of this fund. It's really people that come together and run it because it's its own organization.
Yeah.
So I think
That's
it's a little bit different in that sense, right? But it's the commitment that we have and the work that we're doing. So then the education specifically, because there's a couple different education pieces, right? There is line item in that community energy plan and kind of consultant. There's some of it that there's money in there, Tim, correct me if I'm wrong, that's specific for kind of continuing to drive the home energy retrofit and the on-bill loan portion of it. And they're working on tactics and plans and really moving that forward. I think we would have already been there, if not for COVID, because I think we were looking at a specific proposal. But really the new line item that's here, and I really want to make sure that people understand that this is where it's located. This would be the consultant support so that the community energy plan goes through the process that's already gone through the initial, but then the update, that this would be the additional update to the community energy plan. So there's consultant money here to support that process. But then also as that new position, I would want that position to be a very key portion of those conversations from the city side.
So the consultant will be a good way to get direction on some of this and bring us forward to get it through the.
I'd probably look at Dave more on that because I think we've gone through it again. I think the consultant would help direction, but bringing in the data, the science, okay, if we're gonna try to achieve this goal, what does that mean, and how to connect maybe, okay, what strategies would you have, and how much would you spend in order to get that goal, and those types of things. I know that's the consultant assistance that we've had in the past, and what we think we definitely would want to have that supplement all of the people that we have working on the teams and in the community. So that's where that consultant would fit in. Dave, do I answer that right, or?
I think so.
Yeah, thank you, Keith, that was very helpful.
You got a
Can I
follow-
add one other thing with respect to staffing, and I can't believe I failed to cover this, but we also have a residential energy advisor on staff, which is Ken Freestone. And Ken's is a part-time position, but he basically helps coordinate and steer people through the home energy retrofit program especially. It was largely his and Mark's idea to come up with the SEAL team, so he's very much involved as well. But all those are paid from city funds or BPW funds, not from the transfer of funds to the Holland Energy Fund, which allows for programmatic expenditures.
Quincy?
Thanks, Keith. I have two questions. Thanks. You elaborated a little bit on one of my questions, but Tim, you spoke and said that there was a decline in numbers. I guess are we going to look at marketing this at all?
Yes, there is specifically a marketing budget component here, outside that $100,000, there's an amount there. But some of the development of the fund, a lot of the same people have been sitting around the table trying to think ways to how to stimulate this thing, and we feel like getting some other folks involved will help us think
what I
through that a little bit better.
That right there.
And so that's our intention.
All right, so there'll be fresh eyes in a sense on it.
Yes.
And
Okay.
that SEAL team project, I think, really speaks to that also, Tim, because it's really great new idea that we're really excited about, that we think will breathe new life into that program also.
Okay. And then, so since I've been on council, every year that I've been on council, for some of the new people, we have received awards for finances because of the expertise and the professionalism of Mr. Vagley. And saying that, I guess I was wondering, since you're going to retire and be singing around the country now, if he would be a part of, or if he would have any input on the new individual.
I plan on that, yes. And Tim alluded to that. We put together a marketing brochure already out there. We put that out, I think, beginning of last week or something. Jen's gone now. I get an automated response in my email every time someone applies for that position, and my email is ringing a lot lately. And I will just let you know that unfortunately, I knew this was coming, so I have been using my network, and I've been shamelessly kind of hunting some people down too. So we're really going to miss Tim, because I think you've seen what the depth that he's brought to this organization. But we're also aggressively going to go out, and we're going to make sure that we get the best person possible. And we have a great plan that really Tim put into place, that you allowed us to have some overlap time there. So we've worked this succession plan. We've had for many years now. So now we're going to try to execute it best we can.
Any other questions? Thanks, Tim.
Hi, Chief. How are you? Have you been busy lately?
No, not at all. It's just, nothing going on, really. Well, there's it's a good thing about me wearing a mask and a bad thing about me wearing a mask. The good thing is that I'm probably better looking than I normally am. And the bad reason is sometimes when I talk, like now, my glasses tend to fog up. So if you see me adjusting it, that's probably why, so I can see properly, so.
The hint to talk less.
Ouch.
Yeah.
Okay, well, there's the slides. Any questions?
All right.
That's what Tim did last year. Do you have two things on the slide there? No. No, it's pretty much just, you know, like I always say, it's a status quo budget. Mainly some of the things that I request are capital requests. And most of you have seen all of these. I don't think you're going to be surprised by any of these. We've talked about them in the past. The brain health phase 2, I think we discussed that in a study session back in February. That is getting somewhat delayed. I've been in constant contact with Joel Robertson from Robinson Brain Health. And of course, they're not having any meetings right now. I plan on hopefully having a meeting with them in the third week of May or toward the end of May, and kind of getting this phase 2 ready to roll come July 1. But the phase 1 that we're in hasn't been completed yet just because of this delay over the last few months. So we'll hopefully finish that one up and then move into phase 2 after July 1. Second item, replacement of mobile command unit. I brought this up back on our budget sessions. I've started looking into these units, working with a couple different vendors right now, getting pricing, also trying to see if we can do a trade-in on our unit. Like I've said in the past, our unit's a 2000 unit. It's getting very old. Does not have a built-in generator, those kind of things. We definitely need a replacement for that, a little more room. So I've been looking into that and hopefully have some pricing and those kind of things by July 1. Third, continue to develop command succession planning. We also talked to you at a study session about that. That's obviously been put on hold. There's not been any movement with that just because of everything else going on, but I'm hopeful by the end of the year we can dig back into that with Keith and Jen's help and move that forward legislatively, hopefully. Fire building replacement research. Actually started this back in 2014. This is my fire building folder that we started back in 2014. Mainly looking in, well, both buildings, but mainly looking into the Waverly building, just because that building is now 50 years old, and it was built in 1970. So we're looking at potentially replacing that building, and potentially there's some storage facilities or things on that piece of property out there because it is a fairly large piece of property, and we have several different options. We worked with GMB in the past to get some modeling done and those kind of things. So we'll probably start back on that track. We have some money put away for that in the fire building fund that's put away. And we also have been looking at remodeling potentially phase 2. I guess we're good at phase 1 and phase 2. There's a lot of phase 2s on here. But the phase 2 would be then remodeling the Cullen Park Fire Station after rebuilding the station out on Waverly. We've looked at that. I've talked with Tim in the past. I know there's a drop off in the total bond debt. Looks like in about FY23. So that's just my thought. Haven't really talked a lot with Keith about this, but that's just something we were looking at, possibly getting the ball rolling. Maybe that's the time. Maybe it's not, but that's kind of when things drop off that we may decide to move forward with some groundbreaking out there in that time frame. And the final thing, police range phase 2. Police range phase 1's working awesome, up and running, working great. It's just that there does need to be some sound dampening. It's very loud in there. We've actually removed some of the prior dampening material to get some of the new range in. So now it's louder than it was. So we're looking at adding some dampening specifically on the ceiling area because you can really hear the sound now upstairs in the main area. Before it was in the garage area, wasn't necessarily a big deal, but now you're hearing it up, and I know Keith's heard it in my office, like, okay, they're using the range again, so we need some sound dampening there. So that's really it.
Great.
questions? Yeah. Go ahead, Mike.
We've talked in the past about the potential of a third station.
Is your mic on, Mike?
We have talked in the past
Yes.
about the potential of a third station out by the airport as things get going out there. Is that part of the discussion with the redevelopment of Waverly? I know it all has to do with response times and population densities and all the science that goes along with that. Is that being considered as you're looking at potentially the Waverly rebuild or replacement in Collin Park?
It was part of the discussion that we worked on before. I know Matt Van Dyke and some others were involved with some of this heat mapping and some of the things that we showed our response times. And we feel pretty good if we keep the stations where they're at. The Waverly station could respond out to the airport area, but that was part of the discussion, and there was nothing really finalized back in 13 and 14 when we had that discussion. So that'll definitely be part of my discussion with them to see if that's a possibility to put something out there. I'm assuming we talked about it being more of a satellite type station, a very small one, if that were to happen. But based on the mapping that we were provided before, we felt that we could respond out there appropriately.
Or a regional fire authority would help with that too.
That's
Hint, hint,
part of the
hint.
discussion as well. Yep. That's been a part of the discussion, yes. Mhm.
Other questions?
No, I just want to say, I look forward to hearing more about the brain health, the phase 2, when you get that going in completion. I
Yeah,
think that's very interesting.
It is, it really is. I didn't know what we were getting into, and just to see each individual person get their own folder, and you can kind of look and see what, food you should be eating and what's better for the brain, and it's pretty amazing stuff. And I can just speak from experience. I've went through it. I've taken their recommendations, and I did what they've told me to do, and I do feel better. I feel more alert. Those kind of things. So I think, and we've asked a lot of officers, and they've said the same thing. So I think it has been definitely a benefit, and really it probably couldn't have come at a better time with all this going on, and it's worked out well. And to their credit, they've been sending us videos, specific videos for our department and law enforcement that we watch over email, and they talk about dealing with COVID and these kind of things. So it's been really nice that they're able to jump in and share. They'll talk about, well, I'm sure you're going through this, and you thought about this, and they're spot on. So it's been great.
Supportive, right.
Mike?
Matt, I also would like to have you extend to all the officers and the firefighters. I said something to Chris Tinney when I was talking to him the other day, but and I don't do this very often, but I'm gonna speak for council. We're extremely proud, specifically of the first responders that are out there on the daily basis. You're probably spot on that your brain health could not have come at a better time. It may have taken some of the edge, if you will, off. I'm just assuming here. But if you would, from council, extend to them our thanks and our gratitude for what they're doing on a daily basis, and to yourself and your staff.
Thanks, Mike. I appreciate it. I will. And I know they appreciate all your support and everything, and they feel that support from all of you in the community. And it's unprecedented. It's a unique time, and we're kind of sorting through this just like everybody else. We're not perfect, but we put a lot of things in place. We've made a lot of changes, schedule changes, operational changes, different level of security changes, and they've been troopers so far. Everything's just kind of flowed very well. No issues, no concerns. So I appreciate that, and I'll let them know.
Great. Thank you, Matt, and well said.
Thanks.
Well said, Mike.
As we transition here, before Brian comes up, and I'm gonna scrub down his spot here, but I just wanna point something out too, that maybe combining a couple different things that was talked about tonight. One, Matt, I think I looked at the little graph that Tim presented. Matt represents 46% of our general fund budget. And we had a nice conversation with him, but we didn't spend 46% of our time talking about his budget, did we? Right? Yeah, no, I don't think.
What was
Now,
that?
part of that is fantastic, right? Because I think it talks about that very well managed, do a very good job, and very much appreciate that. But also throw in now COVID, where they're the ones that are on the front lines, and now more than ever, they're the ones that are critical providing services to our community. And I'll let you know, the concern that I have, you know, Tim said, boy, like right now in the immediate, do we have budget concerns? Yeah. I've lost some nights of sleep, folks. But I'm more worried about the long-term impacts of those budget concerns. And it, just connecting things, right? We have some needs that we need to take care of that 2.5 months ago, I would have said, hey, we're on really good track and I'm not really worried about those. But as we talk about the budget concerns that I think are going to extend out multiple years, now all of a sudden I'm really concerned about that. So take that for what it's worth, but those are the things, you know, that we need to make sure that this core service that's more important than ever in the day that we're in right now, that we continue to provide that service, we continue to provide them the equipment they need, but we also can provide them with the location, you know, the fire stations that they need to respond from. So that's going to be a very critical conversation. So as we unpack the negative impacts financially, I'm going to keep that in front of you, right? Because we need to be able to make those changes when the time comes, because these two stations are past due. So thanks, Matt.
Thanks. Thank you, everybody.
Yeah. Hey, before we go on with Brian, let's take a 5-minute bathroom break and come back here at 8 o'clock.
And there are multiple floors. There's 4 sets of bathrooms, so.
included in this upcoming budget, which Keith has highlighted in that overall budget message, that includes some staffing as well as some adjustments to our facility there. So that's encouraging. We're trying to tee things up for that. The next one is with regard to our purchasing with vehicles and equipment, and specifically dovetailing that into the larger discussion about energy in general. And basically, we're looking at hybrid vehicles and also some battery-powered tools that I think is encouraging for the future. And then finally here, some additional funding to be directed to the sidewalk to spruce up that program and basically give it a little more horsepower. The change, the incremental change, just talking with Michelle Price this morning, ends up being about $119,000 worth of additional funding for sidewalk, which is encouraging, and I think we'll be able to do a lot with that. So those are the three topics that I wanted to discuss. And then there was one question with regard to the airport and staffing there, and I'm going to just offer a couple of things there with regard to that. The first being that I understand that these are pass-through costs, that the staffing that's provided to the airport does get reimbursed to the city through the airport authority. And then also, I do think that they're looking at some pretty significant capital projects in the future out there at the airport, and I think the additional oversight and participation is welcome from the airport. So.
And this is one of those examples where Brian's standing in front of you today. He doesn't do the airport work, but rather than just have a whole nother additional level of staff before you tonight, he's speaking like he runs the airport, and I know I have two council members here.
I took a crack at it. How about
Yeah. But, Aaron Thalen is out there and supports that work, so I think he ran down those answers for Brian to share with you.
All right. Any other very specific airport-related questions for Brian or others?
I'll try.
Okay.
And it is, I'll just say, it's a technical word. It's a bummer because COVID is going to impact this guy and the work that we've been trying to do in our transportation network. And he's done such a great job of getting ahead of it and getting us caught up. So, and remember that we do have general fund money that we have that supplements the money that comes into Act 51. So we're just going to go out there and we're going to buy and get more money through Act 51 somehow so that we don't lose the momentum that we've gained and really can keep up on these projects. And Brian's smiling when I say that under this mask. 'Cause
So it's interesting. This year, for those of you who have the history here with the budgets, this year is really the first year where you go out 6 years and we have a really, again, historical standards, really healthy budget the whole way through from the street side. So at least we get to enjoy that for a small period of time, and then it all gets blown apart. But we'll be all right. I think we're in a pretty good position.
Good. Scott, you got a question?
So it's a quick question regarding the airport. From the CARES funds that have been distributed, the Transportation Division has awarded our airport about $500,000. Is that reflective? I didn't see that in this budget, and so when will that amendment be made?
yeah, so those will be amendments that come through. And of course, with the airport, that'll go through the board. It's reflected in our books. But it's like a lot of things. There's funding in a lot of different places that as that becomes more clear and as it comes or what we do with it, then we'll make those budget amendments like Tim talked about as we go through the year.
Okay, thank you.
Great. Anyone else? Great. Thanks, Brian.
Okay, thank you.
Brian. I almost forgot, Mark.
Oh, missed a spot there.
Hammer through, man.
Well, howdy, y'all.
Howdy.
My kids laughed when I put this on. Dad, are you like a cattle wrestler or something, rustler or something like that? So,
Good evening, Mayor, City Council members. It's nice to be here with you this evening. I too have just a handful of items for your attention tonight. The first of them is kind of piggybacking a little bit on one of Brian's items. We do need a couple more vehicles in CNS department. We have a couple small or older ones right now. We're really kind of into a process of getting kind of hand-me-downs from the police department. And we're taking the opportunity now, because we do have some surplus money in our budget, to buy a couple hybrid vehicles. And we really need to be able to have SUVs to be able to get out on some of the job sites, and instead of just standard sedans. Our inspectors appreciate that when they don't have to get out and ask a contractor to help them push them out of the mud. So we are looking to get a couple vehicles. Approximate spend on that is about $50,000. The second item for your attention is we continue to have discussions with the City of Zeeland in regards to a potential part-time building inspector position. So as you well know, we've been really hitting some record amounts of inspections. You know, now with this on top of us now, inspections are about down to nil. But obviously, I mean, the metrics that we've had in the past really kind of point to needing to have some additional, at least part-time help with the building inspections. So we're budgeting approximately $20,000 to $25,000 to help us with that, should we get to the point of wanting to kind of cement in an arrangement with the City of Zeeland. So the third item for you tonight, we've been kind of preaching this one for a while. We've been working on this one for a while, is the adoption and the implementation of the Unified Development Ordinance, our UDO ordinance. So we're on track. Well, we've kind of fallen a little bit behind considering things, but we are on track for getting that to the Planning Commission this summer, and hopefully to City Council also for your approval this summer. And still trying to stick with that timeline. So and in this budget, we've asked for $30,000 to help us implement and get the ordinance online. There's special things that need to be done with general code in order to make the new UDO ordinance kind of alive and have the full experience for the users to be able to use it. It's going to be a very interactive ordinance and lots of graphics. So we're asking for that. And lastly, this is really kind of the big ticket item, but it's the implementation of the solid waste and recycling cart system. Okay, so City Council, you just voted on this in the relatively near past, asking staff to move forward with that. And we are doing that. In the budget, we are asking for approximately $650,000 to $700,000 for the purchase of carts. So these would be recycling carts, as well as educational and marketing efforts to go in there, and also for some part-time temporary help to help roll that out and to be doing some inspections as we get that system up and going. So the good thing with this, though, is you probably all know, this is not general fund money. This is a separate solid waste account. It's a separate enterprise fund that the city has. And I know Tim could talk a lot more about that. But so it's just to clarify, that's not general fund money. Another thing I want to bring to your attention too is, and you probably know this one also, we have submitted for 2 grants. A sizable amount of money. We have a grant into the state, the Eagle Department, as well as the Recycling Partnership, which is a nonprofit group. And jointly, we have asked for, I think it's about $550,000 in grants. And we're really feeling quite confident in those grant proposals, and hope to get if not the full allowance, certainly get a good substantial amount with that. So you can see if we do get those grants, the delta between that and the other spend. So those are the main items that I have for you tonight. I believe we had a couple questions. One of them was in regards to affordable housing. Can you be more specific about the need and feasibility evaluation? And I believe that this was an item that was in our housing and neighborhoods budget. And so really what that amounted to was staff kind of putting a placeholder in the budget to be able to, well, I better just read this so I get it right. So I asked Mark Cornelis, you all know Mark. He's
Great job.
an excellent person who is stepping up in doing this, the whole CDBG coordinator position, and just doing a remarkable job. So maybe I'll just read what he says here. He said basically what that reflects is an intention on the part of CNS staff to evaluate potential affordable housing related programs or initiatives to determine whether they meet a local need and are feasible for the city to consider engaging in, either as a direct provider or through a partnership with a local agency. So the city, as we all know, has limited CDBG funding, and the evaluation of a new program or initiative also needs to factor in how implementing and funding a new program would impact existing programs. So that's really what we're looking to get to with that item. The second question that we had was in regards to the Holland Historical Trust, and that is, this thing keeps writing down, I don't know. The cattle rustlers of 150 years ago must gave themselves away. So there seems to be a big increase in staffing from 2019, 2020, 2021 at the Holland Historic Trust, but I don't see a narrative or explanation. So we did pose this question. I posed it to Tricia. Tricia dutifully passed it on to Ricky Levine, who's the executive director at the museum. And Ricky's kind of narrative or explanation for that is, and I'll just kind of read that too, it's quite brief. So she says an increase in FY 19 and 20 was due to providing some raises to bring salaries to a level where key employees were on par with museum standards in this region. Secondly, they changed one part-time position to a full-time position, and that kind of increased the salary as well as the benefit expenses for that person. Thirdly, she indicates here other personnel increases were planned for this current fiscal year, our fiscal year right now, that did not come to pass, including hiring another part-time position. She indicates that year to date, they're trending $33,000 below their budget, and that was effective March 31, and they expect to be in the range of $40,000 below budget at the end of the fiscal year. So they're kind of tracking below budget. And then lastly, for the increase proposed for FY 20 and 21, she says they're kind of budgeting or looking for average raises of 2% and more significant increases for 2 key positions and hiring 3 additional part-time employees. So that's really kind of a narrative of where they're going with their personnel expenses.
And that would be another example of a group that typically would come in. That budget and everything is not paid for out of general funds or anything, so that work is something that they give that update to. It's reflected in here, but that's not our funding.
I see, that's helpful. Yeah, she's been doing a wonderful job at adding new programming, and so it's nice to see that she's able to increase her impact, yeah.
So we'll look to have her in at some point, maybe during the course of the year, as things open back up. If you want. Thanks, Mark.
Thank you.
Yep. Lynn, did you have another question?
Yeah, just one more
Okay.
thing. It's maybe just a comment. I'm glad to see that, that you're considering evaluating the need and feasibility for creating new neighborhood connection organizations around the city. I know that the 4 that are currently working in the city are really doing a terrific job, even now, trying to find ways to connect with their neighbors and just really doing a wonderful job.
You know what, and I don't think we highlighted that. We do have funding in this budget for an additional neighborhood connector too.
Yeah.
There's so many things, so
We
we
gotta-
we
gotta
forgot
pick-
to highlight that one.
Just gotta pick so we do, we have, we're budgeting, or asking for your approval for, I believe it was $15,000. So we, Mark has been doing a lot of discussion, and Keith and I have been in discussions too over in the past, with Great Lakes Urban. And, so doing a lot of conversations with them, and they're looking to do a startup new neighborhood connector down, South Washington, kind of in the Meadow Lane in Harbortown Village area in those neighborhoods. And we're anticipating, everything seems to be green light
Yeah.
with them yet, and they're anticipating.
Can't believe we forgot that. Yeah,
I
we're
know.
excited about that. So stay tuned. If it comes to pass, then that would be something that we'd let you know about.
And one more question, just like so many of our visions can be embedded in other areas, as part of energy and sustainability, you take in that information, as in planning commission kind of things and ZBA kinds of things, that's part of your purview, isn't it?
Say that again now, so that.
You're in, as far as housing and neighborhoods, is it part of what you consider the energy and sustainability parts of the city's directives and vision?
Yes, so one thing that we're doing, like with the planning commission, we do have a checklist that we ask all developers when they come in, when they want to do a site plan review or whatever. We ask them to fill out a sustainability matrix, and this was something that was developed by the SUSCOM. And we asked them to do that, and really just kind of an awareness thing for the developers, but also trying to push some best practices for them to be thinking about when they're scoping things out, to have those reflected in their development. So we push that rather hard. It is just a voluntary thing at this time, and we're not requiring it, but perhaps at some time in the future, we might want to put a little bit more teeth into it, but that's one thing that we're really trying to push out, sustainability things with new development at least.
Thank you.
Dave, did you have something?
Yeah, either Mark or Keith can speak to this. With the potential addition of a new person in the manager's office and the focus on economic development, I'm assuming that role, the person filling that role is going to intersect with the planning department a fair amount, because you've been pretty active in that arena in the past, correct?
Yes, yeah. In a lot of times, we're the front people when somebody wants to talk about a development. They're calling, and we have initial kind of blushes with people. So yeah, we do a lot of talking and, with the planning and development of stuff, but it also can touch on economic development. We try not to wade into it too far because there's other professionals doing it, but yeah, we anticipate having a lot of interaction and working really closely with whoever is in this new position.
Does that take a little bit of pressure off of your department, maybe having that person more focused on that? Or?
What I would probably say, I don't know if it's a lot of work because it gets handed off to Tim. It'll be very complimentary, and quite frankly, I think it makes the roles cleaner, which is probably good. If someone comes in and is kind of doing the planning and zoning and going through planning commission part of things, which is tricky enough sometimes, right? And Mark is managing that part of it, and then if all of a sudden he has to switch hats and then start talking about abatements and deals and all those types of things, it's definitely best practice to not ask Mark or his team to do both of those things, to have them separate, but yet very much within the structure, complementary, is the right way to do it.
Yeah, I was thinking more in terms of more preliminary interactions and stuff. So, okay, thank you.
Good.
Great. Anyone else? Wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you.
I didn't bring my own.
This guy's the one he and his team are doing most of the all the cleaning.
Yeah, my hands are raw. All right, good evening, everyone. Thanks for having me tonight. So I've got just a couple slides highlighting 4 or 5 different budgets that my team is responsible for. First one is about Parks and Rec. So the first bullet there is we're looking to buy some additional safety equipment, in particular for our forestry crew. We buy safety equipment all the time, but what I'm highlighting here are some really cool noise-canceling headphones that mount onto a helmet that have microphones. So we have 2 sets of them, and we want to buy 2 more sets so the guy in the bucket truck can talk to the guy on the ground, and it cancels out the chainsaw and the chipper sounds, so they can talk just like we're talking here and not have to scream or yell. It's pretty cool technology, and it works super great. So we're excited about buying that. Along with forestry, as we want to clean the forestry yard out, we've been fortunate the last few years to not have to spend money on cleaning that yard out, and we invite the public to come in, fill out a free waiver form, and you can come in and take all the free firewood you'd like, wood chips. And that was a big hit a few years ago, and it has slowly lessened over time, and so our yard's starting to get a little full, and we need to clean that out. We're going to purchase some equipment, not only in the Parks Department, but here at City Hall. I highlighted in another slide, but some small engine equipment. In particular, the last one there is a battery-powered blower. We purchased a couple of these a few years ago, and they're pretty handy. They're not backpack blowers like you see most of our crew run around with. They're just handheld ones. And the cool thing about it is you can use it indoors. So we have one here at City Hall. The PD has one, and they're really, really handy to have. So we're looking to buy a couple more of those units. Then the next 2 bullets are about recreation. The recreation team does a great job of programming and promoting the sense of community around the city, and they're looking forward to planning some programming that revolves around the arts. So more music programs, dance programs, some family yoga classes, and expanding those. It's pretty neat in what they're planning. Really excited about it. And then the last one there is about enhancing some of the supplies and the programming stuff we have at Bow's Pool. We'd like to buy a new ADA lift to help people and assist people to get in and out of our pools, and also purchase some supplies for some more play activities at the pool. The next one is about DeGraff Nature Center. So we're looking to contract out the cleaning of that building right now. The ODC staff does that, and we've talked about doing this for a few years and finally are going to pull the trigger on doing that. It'll help clean the restrooms. It's the same kind of group that would be here at City Hall or some of our other facilities. Clean the bathrooms and the classroom spaces. We've got a couple little capital projects there, the next 2. Repairing some boardwalk at DeGraff on the trails and around the building, and then replacing some flooring in the education area. Some of those areas are more than a decade or more old, so we want to replace those, so great. All right, cemeteries and City Hall. So this top one is kind of unique. We've got to buy a new casket lowering device to replace some of our old units. We have a couple of them, and one of them's aging and needs to be replaced. The next one is some training opportunities for our staff. They have an annual cemetery convention that takes place up north, and we've never attended it, but staff has an interest in doing that, so we're hoping to send a couple people up there to learn the latest and greatest trends in cemetery operation. So.
Wow, there's a bunch of jokes I got.
Yeah, total. Well, I tried really hard not to do it in my slides, so I won't do it now.
In the night, obviously.
That's right. And then Perpetual Care Fund, we talked about this before, but we recently switched our perpetual care money over to the Holland Zealand Community Foundation, and I think it's been pretty good. I look at Tim for that, so I mean, not good like that, but it's been easy and easier to track, I guess. So. That's good. And then City Hall here, we're looking to hire a part-time B employee for some daily maintenance and some setup work. There's a question about some of our staffing changes in the last year, and that's a highlight of that. And then again, like I said earlier, the battery-powered hand tools. And a couple questions. One was about our staff in the last year. So within the last year, we've hired a few new staffers, got some new faces around the office. One in particular that I mentioned here, we had a retirement at the police department, and that offered us an opportunity to reevaluate what we do in our facilities. And we took that opportunity to study it a little bit, and what we ended up doing was moving Orlando Bazan, who was a maintenance staff here full-time at City Hall, moving him to the PD to be their full-time maintenance staff. Took Orlando's position and looked at it and decided that we needed a facility maintenance guy or girl that could kind of oversee the entire city and all of our facilities and help us everywhere, not just at one particular building. So we hired Ron Keaton earlier last spring, just about a year ago now. He's been here. It's been great. He's here every day in the morning, helping with setups first thing, and then he heads out to the fire departments or wherever we need him to go. So that's been a great add. Along with that, we added irrigation tech. So Chris Tork, was our irrigation tech, now is our facilities supervisor, oversees the irrigation side and the building side. And we went vacant without that when Chris was promoted to a facilities supervisor for a while. We didn't have an irrigation tech, and we were trying to do it with part-timers, and we finally backfilled that job, and Francisco started last summer, and it's been great. And so he just now got the green light to starting up systems in the last week, so it's been wonderful. So we're excited to have him on board too. And then Jamie Scott was hired earlier last fall in October as a Deputy Parks and Cemetery Director. And that's a position that I held at one time, and in 2013 when I became interim Parks and Rec Director, the superintendent job, that's what it was called then, was left vacant. So the last 7 years we haven't had that position, and it's really a boots on the ground, kind of overseeing the supervisors and then staff, and can help me out a lot of ways in the whole department. And he's got a really good landscape background, so it's wonderful to have him on board. And he's really bummed we don't have a tulip time to have that for his first year, but he's excited to get planting plants and things like that. So it's been great. Keith mentioned our facilities team earlier, and that's made a world of difference in, I think, all of our lives, if you know it or not. We got people in this building and other buildings that are recently, just from the COVID crisis, are buying PPE and buying cleaning supplies and instructing people how to use that stuff, and it's been really good. But we've been able to get into buildings and do preventative maintenance, change filters out and to help air quality that wasn't happening before, and getting into like all the HVAC stuff at the PD and really helping those folks out over there. So it's been really good. So super appreciative that we have that opportunity to have those people on board. The next question, I believe, was about our Parks and Recreation Administration budget. If I read the slide number right, or is that not right?
I think that was just one of those areas where the city manager recommended budget somehow didn't transfer over, so.
Okay, all right, cool. Good with that one. And then
Can
the
I
last.
answer that a little differently?
Oh,
yeah.
I was wrong. Tim, correct
Go
me,
ahead.
please.
Tim.
So we decided to eliminate this category and budget, so.
Oh, that's right.
We moved that into the other budgets because we felt like this is just redundancy and there wasn't any particular reason to identify these costs there. So those dollars are somewhere else.
And then the last question was about DeGraff Nature Center. The Nature Center is operated very much like what the Civic Center is with VenueWorks. They manage it, they program it, they staff it. We take care of all the utility paying and managing of the capital projects that happen. And our staff works hand in hand with Travis and David and Jamie Krupka about what we're going to do and why we're going to do it and how we're going to get it done. We might supply the product, but they help us supply the labor to get it done. They have a pretty vast volunteer group that assists us that way, and so that's been a great relationship, and it's been working really well. So it's been a win for both of us, I believe. So,
Great. Other questions, comments?
One quick
Yeah,
one.
Dave.
For whomever, the advent of the new grow center, the old greenhouses, there. Would the future of that building fall under Parks and Rec, or is that capital improvement consideration, or what?
Yes, so.
It may be in here somewhere, I missed it, but-
Yeah, it's kind of all of that. So I helped out, and some of our staff helped out with some of the charrette work we did earlier last fall, and determining kind of what to do with that space. And so we were walking hand in hand with that group, and I think it'll come to kind of probably all of us eventually about what we do with it, and then to you to help decide what we do with that space.
We have no budget, necessarily specific budget
The-
attached to that right now, right?
Yeah, so Matt, when he comes up later, we'll talk about that's where that budget space would be in the capital improvement fund budget. But of course, that's one of those ones that we're worried about right now, so we might, as we amend the budget moving forward, we're likely facing with some tough choices, so.
Okay, thank you.
All right, anyone else? Great, thanks, Andy.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Andy.
Thank you.
Good evening.
Good evening.
So I think the first one, I'll just go ahead, Dave, and address that is, yeah, the dollars that it would take to do something with that are in the MCIF budget currently, so we have that built in now. All right, so I'm gonna talk to you about the downtown group, and then I believe it goes back to Dave, and then I'll come back to you and talk to you a little bit more about that. But the 8th Street Farmers Market, obviously this is a public market. We're gonna be working with the county health department, and I'm gonna do the bottom one first. Work with the county health department and MIFMA. So MIFMA is the Michigan Farmers Market Association. Farmers markets have been allowed under this executive order, but there are some best practices and guidelines that Sarah and Kara are definitely working through on how we're gonna hold the farmers market this year. So the good news is that we're still planning on the May 13th opening of that farmers market, and we are going to have some safety precautions in place to make sure that everybody can shop and be safe in the market in downtown. And hopefully, I'm hopeful that sometime this summer, maybe early fall, we're back to the full wide open market, but only time will tell. We are still working to implement the night market. As all of you know, we started that last year. Early success started to wane as it went on, so we think there needs to be some kind of an entertainment component to that, and we'll work towards that this summer. So the DDA, continue to invest in downtown. We have dollars in the MCIF budget to do that. You've seen some of the parking lots begin to get redone down there. We've got a project on College Avenue that we'll be looking at. So we need to continue to invest in our downtown, and we need to come up with an overall plan for the streetscape. If you look very closely at some of the infrastructure, while it still looks good, it is starting to show its age. So how are we gonna replace all of that downtown streetscape over time and still keep that wonderful character of the downtown? Because people love to come here. We've seen that on the beautiful days where people have been downtown, been out walking, including social distancing. Okay, so the PSD. The PSD is an interesting piece. As you can imagine, the downtown merchants are being hit hard by this. They're closed. The governor just opened the retailers for curbside service. The restaurants have been doing what they can with takeout, and we've really been trying to do what we can by featuring some of those downtown businesses, pushing videos out. The PSD has got a list of all the people that are doing curbside takeout, all the people that are now gonna be doing curbside retail, and trying to push what we can to those retailers. So there are things that we are starting to talk about and start to hear about from some of those downtown realtors or businesses as options, and some of those are perhaps pushing out into the sidewalk or even shutting the street down more often this summer downtown. Some of those things we can do administratively through a use of city facilities permit, but some things we may have to come back to you and look at perhaps ordinance changes to accomplish those. Downtown retail and shopping is probably gonna look a little bit different for quite a while in the near term, and that's something that we need to, in my opinion, do everything we can to help those folks. Included in that, we've got a website out, we've got an RFQ back, and we'll be doing an overhaul of that downtown website. I think now, the timing, while we had expected to get that done a little bit earlier, the timing now of delaying that will probably allow us to do some more virtual visiting and virtual commerce for our downtown merchants, helping them out that way. And then, really just how can we help those merchants deal with the pandemic? That's gonna be very important moving forward. I think we're in a good space. We're in a much better position than other communities to have those downtown retail and restaurants come back, but it's still gonna take work, and we still need to work towards that. And then the PSD especially is continuing, look at our diversity and inclusion discussions. What can we do to enhance making downtown more welcome for everybody and getting everyone down in our downtown? Okay, Windmill Island. Windmill Island is going to go through a rough year this year. As Tim discussed early on, a significant portion of our revenue comes in April and May. We know at this point that for sure the stay-at-home order is still in place until May 15th. This past year, we invested in reskinning the pavilion. We invested in doing some of the roofs downtown. But the concerns that we had with high water have now turned into concerns with the pandemic. We are doing everything we can to evaluate what's going to happen in the weekend, how do we limit people coming downtown. And ironically, as of today, the causeway, as of about 5 o'clock, is closed because there's 6 inches of water over it from the rain. So
The highest it's ever been.
it's by far the highest it's ever been. Obviously, we had plans in place as the pandemic started to address some of these concerns, high water, yeah. So we are continuing to monitor that situation, but as of right now, we would not want vehicles out on that causeway. So kind of a double whammy for the island, but we will do everything we can to get through it, and once we come out on the other side, welcome people back to the gardens. Civic Center is in another similar situation to the gardens. They had just begun to kind of hit their stride. They had submitted a budget to the city that was based on, I'll call good information. They knew what their bookings were. They knew they had a couple years kind of under their belt of what they could expect. And then obviously we can't gather. So they are continuing to work hard over there to try to get some of the events that were booked to reschedule. They've been very successful with that. Michael Carbonaro, who I'm actually not very familiar with, but was selling very well for tickets, has been rescheduled. They are continuing to book acts out into the future. But at least for the short term, for this fiscal year, we don't know when they can begin to hold events again. We don't know going into the beginning of fiscal year 2021 if it will affect the events that they can hold. So there's a lot of unknowns at the Civic Center place currently. But we are very much looking forward to and working hard with them to being ready when those events can be held again. Yes, 2 questions. Councilmember Raymond, you questioned if they could be, the square footages specifically could be broken down. Yes,
Yeah,
they
it just
can.
seemed like an odd, it seemed like an odd combination there.
So I think it's restaurant, retail, residential, and basically other.
Yeah.
Yeah, they can be broken down into anything from storage to 117,000 square feet of hotel to 40,000 square feet of church. So we could break them out to 315 square feet of a residential enclosed porch. So yeah, we can break them out as far as, I mean, very, very finitely, but it just is kind of a catch-all.
Yeah.
Beyond
So
those.
maybe sometime in the future, I'll follow up with you about that, because it
Great.
would just be interesting to know.
Yeah, and I'd be happy to send that along. And then you asked about the DEI efforts and if that was written down anywhere. That is in the PSD strategic plan adopted February 6th of 2020, and I actually have a copy of it here if you'd like a paper copy. Great.
Any other questions, comments for Matt? Great, thank you, Matt.
Keith, if Chief Messer is 46% of your general budget, what am I?
Your own budget.
Oh, okay,
Yeah.
all right. Good evening. Nice to see all of you this evening. I've got a few slides here because of the BPW. There's a few different services that we're providing, so we'll try to spend a slide on each of those services. In the area of electric, thing to point out, some good news here again for those ratepayers. There is no retail rate increase planned for this year. As a matter of fact, one of the things that was discussed earlier tonight is the electric renewable premium, essentially, the renewable energy premium, which is an elective rate. Customers can choose up to 100% of their power to come from renewable energy. And we are proposing to lower that about 33%, down from 1.5 cents down to 1 cent premium that would go on top of any consumption that you want to come from renewable. So for an average residential customer, that would be less than $6 a month in order to elect that. In the electric utility, we're also working on building dedicated reserves to pay off a sizable portion of the debt that was issued for Holland Energy Park. Prospects for that are very good, that by next July, when the bonds are callable, that we'll pay off $91 million of that, and it would save about $42 million in interest charges over the remainder of the life of the bonds. And then the subsequent 2 years after that, paying off the remainder to be debt-free in order to maintain significant flexibility in meeting some of our future challenges as the electric utility space continues to evolve. So trying to maintain being nimble there. We're also investing significantly in underground distribution circuits. We've got some of them that are getting quite a bit older. And so we were investing an additional $1.6 million over our traditional investment level each year for the next 5 years, and that would renew all of our underground circuits that are older than 1990. So as we track our reliability statistics, that's one of the things that's starting to become, as we've done wildlife guarding and other things, that's one of the things that's becoming more the reason for outages. Even as few outages as we have, that's the next thing for us to address, so we're working on that. And then also our portfolio does continue to change. We're excited about bringing on 13 megawatts of solar. The 2 largest solar facilities being built in Michigan are being built really backed by public power in the state. Holland is one of many different public power providers, and collectively, we're investing in 2 farms that are together about 110 megawatts, and Holland's portion of that is 13 megawatts, so that'll come into our portfolio over the average usage of that during a year. That has another 2% of our portfolio shifting into the renewable area, so we're excited about that shift there. If we move on to wastewater first, I believe. Here's an area where we are looking at some revenue enhancement. We've had some pretty significant cost increases on the cost of disposing biosolids, which is a byproduct of the treatment plant processes. And so we need to keep pace with that, and one of the ways that we're doing that, we have a very large investment. You can see the last bullet on there, a large investment, 3 years that we'll be getting started with construction of anaerobic digestion treatment, which in itself is a very sustainable initiative because it's going to cut down on truck traffic associated with bringing biosolids to landfills or to farm fields. It's going to cut down on methane production from that biosolids because we're taking that and actually liberating methane within the digester for usage of heat and power on the site. So it'll be a combined heat and power utilization there as well, and it also is the long-term lowest cost option for dealing with some of those increased biosolid costs. So we do also work very closely with our customers to help them with their development and growth to a point where they get large enough where they start using a very significant portion of the plant. Then we require them to constrain that and to start going into some pre-treatment. And one of our customers in the city of Holland here has gotten to that point, and they're making sizable investments in pre-treatment, which is good news for the long term, but it also results in a little bit of a loss of revenue for a period of time because instead of charging them for the strength of that product, they're going to lower the strength of their products considerably. But it does allow for other growth to happen. So it's a good process and a good plan, and it's helped move a lot of our businesses forward in our community over time. If we move on to water, again, recently I spoke to you about Park Township coming on board from a retail perspective. So this budget that you have in front of you actually represents that. About 4,000 new customers on a retail side coming in. It also is a change as well that you talk about no rate increases. Here we're actually in water, again, no rate increase. We're actually seeing a rate decrease for our 1-inch metered service. So our typical residential customer will either be a 5/8 inch meter or a 1-inch meter. To try to get on parity a little bit closer with Park Township on the transition, we feel the financial condition of the water utility is satisfactory to be able to lower that 1-inch rate as a serve charge, or the fixed portion of that charge, down about $3.55. So that'll be an enhancement that our 1-inch customers in the city of Holland will see, and everybody else is seeing flat rates. So that's really good news there too. In the long term with water, one of the other things that we're planning for is some increased reliability on the transmission of water. We have that one water plant out there in Park Township. There's 3 water crossings across the lake, but there are some areas where there's some Achilles heels within that, where if you lose part of the large transmission line out of the plant, you could lose a sizable amount of supply across the lake. So we're looking at a redundant line a little bit to the north along Lakewood Boulevard, which would provide a sizable amount of resiliency and redundancy to that. So it's a $12 million project. Next year we'll be getting into the engineering of that, and then the construction will be in the subsequent couple of years after that. And then finally, if we move to broadband, here's another area where unfortunately the pandemic is causing us an issue. Talked to the council and the board, kicked off a process really of looking at how can we expand our broadband network throughout the community, and that was going to be a very sizable, it is still going to be, but we intended for that to be a very significant community outreach to try to engage the community and talk about the opportunities that are there and explore the ways that we could do that. And whether it made sense for the community to do that. And here we are really kind of unable to do the kind of connection with that community that we want. But in some regards, this pandemic is teaching us some things about the need to be connected from a data and a video and other things at a very high level with telemedicine, whatever it might be. And so maybe there's something in that will allow us to come out of the back end with a lot of really specific information and specific ideas about how it can enhance that. So in our budget this year, we're kind of continuing along with some opportunistic development, but we do plan that our shared gigabit, which is this lower cost network that we put in the downtown, is growing over that 5-year forecast. And so again, the last bullet there talked about the engagement in the community, and that still is something that we'll work on. Just going to be a little bit of a delay here because of some of the pandemic issues and the ability to reach people right now. So I'll stop there. I think that's the last slide, and see if anybody has any questions.
Questions, comments?
Just a comment, if I
Yeah,
could.
go ahead, Dave.
Dave, I'm glad that, first of all, I want to make the comment that I don't think there's another organization within the whole of the cosmos that says adept at creating acronyms as the BPW. I'm continually in awe of how you all do that.
Sometimes we have the same acronym used 3 times, different.
And I don't even know it.
Yeah.
So kudos to you for doing that. My real point that I want to make is that I'm glad that you hit on the broadband issue, in that BBW is realizing, I think, along with everyone else, the real importance and the essential nature of broadband to our existence. Your last point here, talking about community engagement, the how portion of it, I think, isn't even in question. We all know that, certainly entertainment, but education and the way that we do work, the way that we just exist is just as much an essential thing as water and sewage disposal. So I'm glad that you're looking at that. I just want to, and I will continue to reinforce that to you whenever I see you.
Great.
But thank you for paying attention to that.
And if you need any help with any acronyms, I'll be happy to help out.
I may need a glossary.
All right, sounds good.
All right. Anyone else? Great. Thank you, Dave.
Thank you.
Matt Van Dyken, bring us home.
Yeah, the last one, right? All right, good evening again. He likes to tip this up every time he cleans. All right. So, well, I have the microphone, so I'll be careful. All right, back to work. So, highlights. This is for CATV and IT. Marketing this community will be more important than ever. So once this crisis passes, as we all know it will, bringing people back to our community is going to be very important, and engaging our citizens is going to be extremely important as well. Our goal is to continue to maintain the IT infrastructure to support city employees in rapidly changing times. What council probably doesn't realize is we deployed a significant number of laptops and devices and enabled our staff to work from home during this crisis. That's something that we need to keep an eye on as the IT department to be ready for whatever changes need to happen. Tim had finance people working from home. We had HR people and city managers working from home. So we had people all over the place. So we need to make sure we keep an eye on that moving into the future. We have a very extensive security camera system. You know, back when I started here 21 years ago, I think we had 3 security cameras. We now have hundreds, and whenever we have an issue, we simply put out another camera, which solves the problem generally, but we need to better manage that, make it easier for staff. Our Wi-Fi system works very well, but it is getting to be of the age that we're going to need to overhaul that. So the Wi-Fi, as you all know, Mike probably the most, spends time in different city facilities. All of our facilities are set up the same, so you can simply grab your laptop, walk in the transportation department, connects just like you're here, connects to the PD or the fire or wherever. So we're going to evaluate overhauling that. And then one of your goals is citizen engagement, and you've got a budget number. We expect that we will be needed to help you facilitate the implementation of that software. We stand ready to do that. MCIF. So first and foremost in the MCIF, we're going to fund the maintenance of our city facilities, right? We have Fix-It First funds in parks. We have Fix-It First funds for city facilities. We're going to make sure we take care of the assets that we have now. We're going to need to adjust for financial uncertainties. None of us know where this is going to end up. That fund has been in much better shape than it was years ago, but we need to just be ready to be adaptable to the realities that we face. As Matt touched on, we're going to replace the fire stations or renovate the fire stations probably in 2023. This plan includes basic lights and riggings for the Civic Center. That was a topic that we talked about at length, that it comes as a recommendation from the Civic Center Board. We're going to upgrade amenities at our parks. The ball fields at Matt Urban Park have some very, very old lights that need to be replaced. There's some miscellaneous things that need to happen out there. The tennis courts at Moran, you were all, hopefully, believe most of you were on the bus ride when we went out and looked at the Matt Urban basketball courts and the new surface, the new technology that was used out there. This plan actually allows for the Moran Park courts to get the same treatment. The way those were built way back when, they're basically about 8x8 concrete blocks, and they expand and contract at slightly different rates and create problems for those surfaces, so this will solve that. And then plan for a downtown skating rink and a band shell replacement or refurbishment or out at Collin Park. So we've got some very exciting things. These are just a few. There are many, many things within that plan, some small, some large. There was one that actually just struck me as Matt was talking that I wanted to discuss with you too, because I know Councilmember Corbin asks about public safety often, but this plan also begins to replace all the fire packs, the scuba tanks that they have for their turnout gear when they go into a fire. It'll be a 2-year process to replace all of those tanks. So with that was the quick. I missed the first part of that, Mike.
The filling station or the recompression or just the SCBA itself?
No, so the filling station we replaced
Oh,
this
just
year.
recently, didn't, okay, I'm
Yeah.
sorry, yep, you're correct.
Yep.
Sorry about that.
Yeah, Quincy?
Something we did a while ago, and, just thought about it when you talked about scuba. What's the feedback on the new boat? Well, not so new now, but.
Oh, I am the wrong person. The other less handsome looking Matt was probably the one. But maybe Tim's got some. Yeah.
Actually, I spoke to Captain Tinney today, and he said that boat is servicing. It's how that topic came up was a crapshoot, but
So
it
it was
did happen.
raining.
And he said that boat is doing really well, and they are planning to declare the current one surplus at our next meeting, so there you go. I did ask him why that wasn't done before. And he said, well, it started leaking, so.
Yeah, Nikki?
Yeah, are the grants available for some of this, like the fire equipment or things in the parks?
Yep, so there is for some things there are grants available. The PD and public safety get different grants for different things. Those grants my understanding is that they have kind of dwindled over the last several years. But the federal stimulus packages that the federal government is currently putting out has all kinds of new stuff in it. So we actually are meeting tomorrow to talk about what we can apply for. But really nobody from a local government perspective seems to quite understand what that means. The rules have been dramatically loosened. So we're gonna meet tomorrow, see if some of these things, some of these larger things in the capital improvement plan would qualify for some of that significantly increased grant funding.
Anyone else? Great, thank you, Matt. Any questions?
What, that's it?
That's it? I just have a comment that in my first time going through this budget, one of the things that I realized is the vast majority of this budget are things that are kind of fixed costs, you know, when we're looking at the people aspects of it, and providing essential services to the community. And what a benefit it is to this council to be able to know that those things are just being taken care of, that they're done and they're done well, and that we don't really have to spend a lot of time and attention and saying, I wonder if, you know, that this thing is being done well or that thing is being done well, because the essential services piece of this is done very, very well. And that there's a real benefit and almost a luxury that we have in being able to say, let's spend our time and our attention and our focus on moving the community forward and paying attention to what those priorities are, that we don't even feel like we have to think about those essential services as a priority. And I think that speaks a whole lot, to councils of the past and putting us in a good financial position and getting good people in here, but also knowing that we've got an incredible staff that is doing a great job in keeping the lights on and keeping the wheels turning at a regular time, but also especially in, you know, what we've been referring to as COVID time. You know, in this time of uncertainty, the lights have stayed on and the wheels have kept turning and the process has moved forward. So thank you, and thank your staff for that.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Anyone else? Yes, Keith.
So just so everyone's on the same page, unless, so kind of the what next makes sense, right? So what next would be, because we've got a couple weeks now, that the public hearing and your consideration and definitely our recommendation for adoption would be on May 13. And then I think, as Tim and we kind of pretty consistently outlined tonight, we're going into a different year. And unfortunately, I think we're going into a couple different years. So we will work with you, obviously, on a process to monitor the budget in a totally different way than we probably have in the past. And then I really appreciate the partnership with council to do that really well for the community. So we have some difficult years ahead of us. Sorry, that's a downer to end on.
Yeah. Just a very quick comment. I just want to thank all of the staff and Keith for working on this budget. I'm not a numbers person, so these are things that I don't really look forward to a lot in terms of ingesting it all, but I do go through it and I glean things from it. And enough to recognize how much work there is involved in it for people who do enjoy it. So thank you all very much for doing a great job. We have a lot of work yet to do in terms of implementation, but we'll do that when we do it. So thanks a lot.
Yeah, Lynn?
Yeah, I think what's really important to note is that everyone is really excited about the work they do. Like when they're talking about the things they're looking forward to and the things that are in their budgets, it's not just numbers to them, it's making the community a better place, and that's just really exciting to see.
Thank you, Lynn. I actually was going to say somewhere in my introduction too, and I know it's late, so I won't make this long, but there's a lot of sadness going around right now, right? And I'll let you know too that actually the fact that we only had one night of doing this year instead of two, you might be like, thank goodness, right? But for our staff, they really look forward to this night to be able to talk about what they do and brag about it because they're excited about it. And this is usually one of the best times of the year where they're able to get in front of you and talk about what they do in a way that otherwise, it just isn't highlighted. So I really noted that there was a sadness among staff that they weren't able to kind of give the amount of time that they normally do. But yes, that's because they're excited about the work they do. And not only kind of the normal, but hopefully you picked up too that we were really excited about a budget that we think really delivers on where we're going to. So thanks for reminding me. I wanted to make sure I said that.
Yeah. Mike?
Yeah, I just want to expand off of what Lynn said there. You can definitely tell from the staff. You can definitely tell from this budget. You can definitely tell from the enthusiasm that you get from the presentations. They enjoy what they're doing. They enjoy coming to work. They enjoy serving the city. And I want to be very clear and thank you, thank Tim, Matt, everybody that was involved, and Dave, everybody that was involved in this. You're never going to get us 100% because sometimes we don't even get us 100%. But what I'm seeing here with the uncertainties, even though a lot of this was done prior to the uncertainties, we have enough flexibility here to be able to sustain the city going forward. We've proven that time after time after time after time. Our rainy day funds, if Gadsby has a positive, that guideline is about the only positive I can see in that, and we follow that to the T. In fact, we probably go just a little bit over that, and it has served us well. We aren't, and I think you alluded to it, there's a lot of cities out there that have no leeway in raising their tax rate. They've maxed it out. They have no rainy day fund, and they're in trouble. We can be very proud as a city staff and as a city council in the past and for those in the future of the financial and fiscal responsibility that we have done. And a lot of that has to do with the staff. We can't thank you enough. It's not a done deal yet, but thank you. Countless hours that have been put in there. We want to thank all of you.
Quincy?
I only want to say I concur with all of that, all the work that's been put in. Kudos. I'll keep it brief and just thank you for that. It makes our life a little easier with that kind of enthusiasm, excitement, and ownership. So,
Thank you, and I'll be glad to share that broadly.
All right. Anyone else? Great. Thank you all. Thanks for weathering this with masks on, and we'll see you in a couple of weeks. Thanks much.